Hello, everyone. We wanted to start with a message that we believe is important for you to hear. It's a message about our business model, about our funding, and how we plan to fund this whole operation on both of our sides and together with our podcast. So I think Simon, you might want to start with this because you actually have a good story about this. So feel free to take this over.
Sure. Good to hear your voice again. It's
Same here.
been quite a bit of feedback in all different areas about the podcast. I think a lot of people like dialogue and going deep diving into some of these topics. So, yeah, I've been a longtime listener of another podcast, and they from day one had this value for value model. It's the No Agenda podcast. It's kind of like news and media information and deduction of politics and things like that. But the reason that I've been so loyal to that show and a contributor myself, I'm actually Closed Network is an executive producer. It's on the website. Is exactly that. The listeners are the producers of the show. And a producer can be someone who offers their time, their talent, or their treasure. So they have a lot of people who just even do research and will read papers and filings for nonprofits. They'll read bills and they'll paraphrase, they'll cite the sources, and they'll send them to them because there's so much to keep track of that, one person can only do so much. And so they help out with supplying, research for the show. And then there's talent. So you have individuals who are really technical or creative artists and things. So that could be things like creating artwork, album art for the podcast episodes. It could be merch. It could also be technical, helping set up infrastructure like Mastodon servers. They have their own Mastodon, Matrix servers, websites, IRC chat, so people can talk live during the episodes, things like that. And then treasure, which is basically financial contribution, which is not expected, but it's kind of like if you want to see the show continue to grow and for them to be able to continue doing it, that is a model that works, that doesn't put them in a position where they have to appease a sponsor or an affiliate. It allows them to be 100% objective and call anything out that they see, or if this one thing links to another, that they're not going to put themselves in any kind of a bind financially, because they don't have any obligations to any companies or entities other than the individuals who, air quote, produce the show. So they're considered producers, just like you would, would on with like a movie or a television show. Producers are the ones that are helping acquire the talent for the show, they're securing the funding for the show, and they're, pulling in all the directors and stuff. Oftentimes they're just writing a check and they get a producer credit, but other executive producers and associate producers are really contributing to the success of the end product. And so when I started Closed Network, I adopted that as how I wanted to receive support for the show. And it's, also to be clear, not to do it necessarily to make money. There's other ways to make money, but you do have a lot of financial costs when you do things like this. And if you want to get better and do it like as a full-time job, you definitely need support to do that. So if you can cultivate a community that's supporting the end product together, a collective, then it makes it possible without having to appease and cater or not report on something or not talk about something because there is a financial association with that. And so for me, I do accept donations off of my website. And I also really encourage people to donate using Bitcoin on the Lightning Network, using a podcasting 2.0 app that allows them to download, and they can load some Bitcoin, $20 worth or however much they want into their wallet on that app. and they can stream Satoshis, stream sats, which are just little denominations of Bitcoin, to their favorite creators. And there's a lot of podcasts that are set up to do that. I just knew that that was the route I kind of wanted to go down. And the reason I like that route too is because I am a huge crypto advocate, and I think that the more we use it as a means of transferring value, the more valuable it becomes, and also the value in truly not being able to contribute without any censorship to the content that you want to see be created. So that's kind of the 4-minute version of it. Value for value is pretty much the best way to describe it, you know.
Yeah, we both decided sort of independently of each other to go this route because we believe that it is the most preserving of of the integrity of information that we are trying to share and teach. And also we just want to be free to be skeptical, critical, and questioning of any product, service, company, or organization out there, or individuals. And we shouldn't put a monetary incentive or financial relationship with anyone between us and the information that we want to share. At least that's how I would phrase this or understand this. So it is very important for us to refuse all affiliate and sponsorship relationships that many companies would want to offer us. But if companies want to come to our show, the only way that they could do this is with an interview, and they should expect us to ask hard questions. But we will definitely not be exposing ourselves to their profit incentive, because that's not in line with the interest of the information.
Right. I mean, if you have a business model for that starting out, I think that it's perfectly acceptable if you want to do a podcast or a video content around your this different sports teams and that kind of thing, and it's like you're sponsored by Adidas or Nike. I mean, I don't want people to construe that I have a problem with sponsorships either, but I think that there's a kind of a fork where things can be a little more murky if there's sponsorships involved or affiliates or anywhere where there's a transaction happening versus being able to be 100% objective about all of the research or anywhere a story takes you. You mentioned, we were talking earlier about Ronan Farrow, who broke, the story on Harvey Weinstein, that he wasn't able to do so because the company he was working for was financially incentivized by the subject of the story. And so, and there's lots of examples of that. That's just one particular one that really stands out to me, the power that money can have in influencing the message or news or whatever from getting out to the subscribers or people that are consuming that content. And I just like being able to do what I want to do, or talk about what I want to talk about. And if there's a story about one of the services that I use personally or I've recommended, then I don't have any doubt. I don't have any reluctancy to call it out immediately because there's no financial relationship or any bind there. And particularly because of this subject matter where we're talking about preservation of privacy, preservation of personal data, and security in a lot of ways, you're making recommendations on apps and services to use in very specific situations that could be very dangerous for somebody, whether it's social dissidence, like protesting, organizing, communicating about publications, or talking with sources. So it's kind of a little bit of an extra sensitive area to just be really mindful about. And if you want to retract something, it's not you don't have any issue doing that, right? Like I was just mentioning on the previous Closed Network podcast, episode 14, about the acquisition of simple login by Proton Mail. And on the surface, it looks cool. I like both these services. I use both these services. I think a lot of people listening to this might at least be aware of them, if not use them themselves. And I can instantly stop and question and open dialogue. Just say, hey, is this a good thing? I can tweet it. I can say it, because there's no financial obligation to promote the acquisition. Now, I'm not saying it's bad. I don't know enough about it. I just know that when you centralize some of these things, and we use these services to preserve, identities or tracking, that maybe in the long run it's not a great thing. I don't know. That's just an example of something that's happening like within this time frame. That could be used as an example.
Yeah, you made an excellent point there, because we are talking about tools and products and services that are essentially deciding whether someone can live or be free or spend time in jail. And it is very important that this advice or any sort of criticism is being laid out to you, to the audience, in a way that is as free from corporate influence as possible. And now imagine that, for example, we often talk about GrapheneOS, and we say how GrapheneOS is just the most secure operating system that you can get. There is also CalyxOS that we also talk about. However, CalyxOS has plenty of objective merits by which it is a lot worse than GrapheneOS when it comes to your security. And one of them is being that CalyxOS is actually pretty far behind on security updates, which is essentially important to your security, especially if you are a potential target of advanced persistent threats. So in that case, GrapheneOS is going to win all the time. But if we were sponsored by CalyxOS, because GrapheneOS doesn't do sponsorships, only CalyxOS does, or Calyx Institute rather, then we would have to, do a sponsor segment for an objectively inferior product, and it'll be directly conflicting with the interests of what we are trying to teach here. So again, this is not trying to start any sort of drama between any projects or communities, but it's just trying to be as objective as possible. And both Closed Network and the Hated One, we decided to be free of corporate influence, because we believe that corporate influence is actually tainting the opinion and the advice that we think should be as pure as possible.
I like both of these projects. I actually just talked about on that previous episode I did that I switched back to GrapheneOS, and it's not a knock against CalyxOS. I am actually a sustainer contributor for CalyxOS. I have their hotspot. I have promoted their service and will continue to do so. But I did talk about the little bit of a lag and behind of the updates and why that is. And they have more pieces, kind of like Linux distributions. Some of them are more bleeding edge. Some of them are a little behind. And it's because they kind of serve different purposes. It doesn't make one better than the other, but it might, depending upon your use case, your specific use case of why you're using a degoogled ROM for your phone. And for me, I did have some issues, and I was able to resolve that by just switching over to GrapheneOS. GrapheneOS is also has some really cool stuff going on that I like a lot, and I wanted to use it. I'm a user. I'm a tech nerd. I like to try this stuff out. I like gadgets. I like to tinker. But I can freely talk about pros and cons, or what I'm using, or why I decide to use this or that or the other. Because you're right, there is no financial incentive. And the products and services that I actually do use, in most cases, unless I'm using like a free model, I'm paying for it just like everybody else. So I'm also not. I'm not like in the. I don't know. I say the term in the business of, but I don't know what else to say of slandering companies either. Just because there might be some negatives, but if the ethos and as a whole is still moving towards something I agree with or I want to see flourish, it's like I want to support that, right? There's nothing really to gain, is my point, by being negative or positive about one service or another from a financial perspective. Daniel McKay did just tweet me and said that he would send me a couple Monero though if I promote. I'm just kidding, totally kidding. I want to state that I am a paying sustainer supporter of CalyxOS, and yes, I'm using GrapheneOS on my phone right now. And that's a good example, of kind of demonstrating that is I would like to see twice as many options that we have available, but I will try to support all of the ones that are at least moving in the general direction of where we're trying to go. That may even be, communicating with legislatures and signing petitions and all these things, because though it may not be 100% on target with what I want, it moves us closer to the objective, which is preservation of individual freedoms. And that only comes when you have privacy, when you have these spaces to share ideas and not be censored. And when I say that, I'm kind of tongue in cheek. I'm not talking about people always go, well, what about the extremists, the white supremacists? I'm talking about general sharing of ideas and not having to be worried about being categorized or labeled as something. And sometimes I will even play devil's advocate. I'll explore ideas and do things just to challenge my own belief system. I think it's really important to do that. So how can you do that, if you're being influenced by something else? This Utah legislation, the privacy, law that just got passed that will hopefully be going into effect by the end of next year is really good for privacy for consumers. That companies of $25 million a year in revenue or more have to abide by being transparent about how they're collecting data. The data needs to be portable to another service provider, like a mobile phone number. You need to be able to opt out of data collection or the sale of your data. And you need to be able to request that your data be deleted from their system. And there is financial penalties for not following these laws. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about here. When I say moving towards this goal or this objective, I mean in its totality now that's specific to the United States. This is a particular state, Utah, that's done this. There's a handful of other states, Colorado, Virginia, a couple others, and like 20 or 30 others that are working on this type of stuff. So I know that a lot of that already exists in countries in Europe. My whole point is anything that's moving us towards the preservation of that, I'm generally in support of, but I need to be able to also call out what's not, or if something looks suspect to me without feeling like I might be infringing on some sort of agreement that I have already previously made. And the only way I can do that is to only accept support from the people that consume the content.
Yeah, I think I would say that my only closing remark on this is that if you are sponsored as a creator, you are paid money to say the positive things about a product. But this is the thing about privacy and security, is that there is no universal solution that applies to everyone equally. Even for services like Tor, for some people it's better to not use Tor to be more secure, because the physical security is also important. And if they are caught using Tor in a country where it is strictly punished, then it's a great risk. Even if Tor provides bridges, it could still be a risk. So there is no solution where you can just go for 30 or 60 seconds in a paid segment and just lay out all the positives of that product and the service and just leave it at that. there are always going to be limits to what any sort of service can achieve. And one of these examples is, for example, Proton Mail. That's where they had this recent scandal over a French journalist who Proton Mail was forced to log for the police. And if the information was communicated properly that, hey, well, Proton Mail does encrypt your messages, but they still have plenty of metadata, including your location, your IP address. And if you don't take any additional measures that are not available to Proton Mail, you have to do them yourself, then you're exposing yourself, you are compromising your security, then, we are not telling the people the truth. We are only telling them what Proton Mail would want us to tell the people, the positive side, the good thing that Proton Mail does, not its limitations. This is my main issue with sponsorships, because I want to be able to say the good stuff, and I want to be able to say all the drawbacks and the limitations, and when it's not being used, when it's not recommended to be used. So this is why staying clear of any sort of monetary incentive, whether that's a sponsor segment or affiliate link in the description, I think it's absolutely essential. And I think, at least from my perspective, we have pretty much covered what we wanted for this topic.
Yeah.
But if you want to add anything more, feel free to.
I recall a video you did a while back, the delete signal one, and I was like, oh, this is spicy, and you can't really clearly, and I'm not saying I think everyone should delete signal or anything like that, but it was a good topic, because you can't talk about the deficiencies of some of the really popular encrypted messaging apps if you have to be able to contrast it to why something else like Matrix or Briar or Kutch or some of these other things that we've discussed are more beneficial. But this also goes back to the use case, which then goes back to what we also previously discussed, which is important to identify what your threat model is, because a threat model for a journalist is going to be very different from the everyday person living in a westernized civilization. So again, are you avoiding corporate surveillance, or are you avoiding government surveillance? Because you are going to want to use very different tools, and that's just to kind of piggyback onto what you said. There's not a one size fits all solution for a lot of these services. They're really kind of you kind of need to analyze your situation and what you're trying to do. You have all the information, so then you can make an educated choice about what direction you're going to go. So yeah, I think that's pretty, I would say obvious, but I don't think it's that obvious sometimes, because it has to be stated why sometimes you might recommend something over something else. They both might be good, air quotes, good or better than using iMessage or WhatsApp or using Proton Mail over Gmail. But you still need to understand what your attack vectors could be depending upon your threat model. And I think that's just something that really needs to stay in the forefront of almost everything we talk about, because otherwise, people they take the advice of people like you and I and other creators who are talking about the subject matter, and they need to be able to be wholly informed, I guess, is my point.
Yeah, that's that's a very important point, because I there's the cough again.
You got that second round of COVID coming on, huh?
Yeah, I actually like that you mentioned the delete signal video, because that's the one that got a lot of backlash from the community. And before that delete signal video, I've made a lot of delete YouTube, delete WhatsApp, delete Facebook videos. And I wanted to make a delete signal video because I wanted to show people how this thing can actually happen to something that the community universally regards as a gold standard. And Signal is very good at protecting the content of your messages. However, Signal has problems where, for example, the metadata is extremely exposed. It is still a lot better than iMessage and WhatsApp and plenty of other encrypted tools. However, Signal still exposes your metadata to advanced persistent threats, to the server providers, to internet service providers, to perhaps governments, they can easily, correlate like who is communicating with who, and the metadata itself is just as important as the content of the message. So if we want to have even more security, if we want to have even better trustless design, then we should be able to criticize Signal, even if it is regarded as this amazing tool that can do no wrong by a lot of people. So I really enjoy that both you and I actually have this freedom that we can say whatever we need to say about any particular product or tool.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I agree. I just things change too. They're always evolving, and what's working today or what the ethos is today, leadership can change within that organization, and some of the objectives or the mission for what that company organization could change, and it may not always change for the better for the individual, but better for the business model. So, you can't retroactively take something back if you were influenced, but you can say, well, I used to use this and now I don't, and here's why. That is something I don't want anyone to be able to take away from me. So yeah, I agree. And it's interesting. We're talking about the metadata. This is kind of leading into more of like privacy advocate kind of things about over the Google messages. Google's access to your messages on the default messaging app, and it seems to be. I don't know where to point to for definitive proof, but a lot of researchers are very concerned about them having the entirety of the message being able to be accessed and analyzed just like Gmail. So these are the text messages going back and forth, not just metadata, but content as well. And that is alarming to me, that, all of these people, if they knew that would just be okay, knowing that, Google's probably the worst at all of this. And I don't think anyone's going to be that surprised by it. But I guess there was a research paper that was highlighting, Google Apps, they do not feature their privacy policies and explain that data is being collected when it, requires from third-party apps in the Play Store to actually identify, but they don't self-identify, if that makes any sense. That might be a story for another time that I could get into and probably cover, but you just have to be aware. There's always, there's money is a big influencer. It's hard to turn it down.
It is
sometimes.
The biggest influencer. Yeah. Yeah. So we've done 2 episodes so far. This is the 3rd, and every time we make an episode, every time, this is the 2nd time actually, we do take listener questions, and a lot of your questions and input is actually pretty interesting and important. You do ask your questions on my subreddit. You do send questions or points to closed network email. I guess that's your main point of communication, I guess.
Correct. Yeah, most of my questions come in email or voice. I have the ability for people to ask questions or record a message and post it. And I tend to let people know that I will, if it's appropriate, play that on the podcast, as long as they're not, giving their name or something. I don't want anyone to feel. But yeah, generally it's email.
Yeah, so I actually enjoy the segments where we address some of the viewer or listener questions. So the last time we did an episode, we talked about a lot about how GrapheneOS is just superior to many other operating systems. And one of the listeners asked a question, basically on what metrics we classify GrapheneOS as more secure than Linux, other operating systems, iOS, Android, or even other custom ROMs. So would you like to jump into this one?
Yeah. So as far as comparing it to like Linux or other ROMs, I think maybe with other ROMs you could probably fill in the blank with like Lineage OS or something, which I've used. It's a good project. The issue there is oftentimes you can't lock the bootloader. So and that's more of a deficiency of like being flexible enough to work on a lot of different phones as opposed to GrapheneOS and CalyxOS in this regard with just Pixel devices. I see that question a lot on the Matrix chat as well as the forum on Reddit, on the subreddit for each one, which is why can't I install GrapheneOS on this or CalyxOS on that? And they're focused on that particular hardware platform because one, it's easier to manage your builds for just a subset of devices, and second, there are technical traits within the hardware that actually do in fact make it much more secure. And Linux is kind of, I equate it to like the sledgehammer, trying to use a sledgehammer to hit a nail. It's great for a lot of things, but in the context of one particular thing, outside of it being a server, like a reverse proxy Nginx server or something like that, for a phone to be that fully functional, it's not super great at. It has a lot of vulnerabilities because it's not really designed by nature to do that. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but it would be difficult to do at scale, especially across multiple devices. And I think, Ubuntu Touch was a great example. It kind of worked decently, and they tried to make it work, but their focus was to make it work and not for it to be a super secure phone. And I think Android out of the box, it's built with intent to utilize services out of the box that do not respect your privacy. Their goal isn't, hey, let's make a phone that doesn't spy on our people. It's literally, let's make a phone that spies on everything that they do. So, with GrapheneOS, it's by design intended to be as hardened as possible from the ground up, which is why when you install it, there's no apps even really out of the box other than the phone dialer, a contacts app, a files, the basics, a few of the basics, which are handpicked and selected. Now, they've recently, with the Sandbox Google Play stuff, they've really incorporated that well as an option. So there's an apps app now on the GrapheneOS ROM that you can open and then install those and then go install additional apps. But out of the box, just installing it is really good because it's by design to obfuscate information about your phone, which could track back to you really easily. People will say, well, that's in CalyxOS too. True, but there's, just looking at this right now, MAC address spoofing is a big component of that for connecting to different Wi-Fi networks on different intervals. Your MAC address will randomize. So if someone's trying to correlate one device across multiple networks, it'll be really hard to track if they're looking at Wi-Fi data because it won't be the same MAC address on each network. It'll look like a different device. The way everything's containerized and permissions have to be explicitly granted for access to your location data. So to access your GPS, accelerometer, different components within the phone, accessed by software, have to be explicitly granted access. Now, this does impede the user experience a bit, but if your main objective is to try to be as hardened as possible, that's what they're going for. And I feel like CalyxOS tries to do as much of that as possible, but also making the phone as usable as possible for someone who might be coming from an iPhone or a stock Android experience. So they're not, because I will say there's a bigger learning curve to using GrapheneOS, or at least there used to be. You would have to go download F-Droid yourself. When you do the install for Calyx, it will just give you the option to go ahead and, hey, like, do you want to go ahead? It'll by default say, do you want to install F-Droid, Aurora, Orbot? You kind of have to have some knowledge to make your phone more usable as a smartphone device on GrapheneOS than CalyxOS. With Android, and Linux and other ROMs. I haven't actually used Lineage OS in a couple of years. The last time I set it up was in like I think 2017 on a OnePlus 3T, and it was good, but you couldn't lock the bootloader. And being able to lock the bootloader is really important because if someone gets physical access to your device, they could essentially get into the phone. Whereas with CalyxOS and GrapheneOS, as long as the bootloader is locked and you've unenabled those developer options, OEM debugging and your the OEM unlocking, they can get into the phone, but the phone will erase itself first. It'll wipe itself. If you want to unlock the phone, you can. Someone gets physical access to it, but it'll wipe itself. So there's like this, now the NSA could probably get into it, sure, like something like that. But, I'm talking about, an individual maybe trying to get into your phone. If they plug it in, if they try to, unlock it, they're going to be faced with this whole reset thing. So they'll get a vanilla phone. They won't have access to any of your information that was on there. I think that's kind of the 10,000 foot view explanation without getting super technical. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to do some major corrections in a few of your points, but for the most part, you were perfectly fine. But you did make some things that a little bit said some things that a little bit triggered me. I'm sorry.
Well, that's good, and it's really important because I just want to preface that when I explain some of these things, I'm generally talking to an audience that is a deer in headlights when it comes to this. Very noob, very beginner. So I do distill quite a bit and gloss over some of the more technical aspects because I get people lost a little bit. So I'd love the correction because number two, I am not an expert in all of these areas. Like, I only have so much time to play around with them and learn them, and I'm distro hopping a lot. So definitely enlighten me.
Yeah, so this is why I like that it's the two of us and not just me or yourself alone, because you know things that I don't. For example, you have tried so many more things that I have, especially with other ROMs and many tools. You have such a deep experience with self-hosting and servers, and I have no experience with CalyxOS, so I didn't even know how CalyxOS was doing its thing, and it's good that you were able to point that out.
Yeah, and it's also important to highlight that they're trying to bolt in components like micro G that are dependent upon them relying on those upstream builds from other pieces to roll out in their updates. Now, I would love to talk to CalyxOS because the one thing I'm not totally clear about, and I'm pretty sure, is micro G is a separate open source project.
It is, yeah.
That can be rolled into any number of Android builds or downloaded and installed out separately, like side loaded. So their development is on a different timeline than what CalyxOS is probably hoping to bake into their builds when they do updates. So when we talked about that lag, those are dependencies that are kind of things that are probably out of their control. I don't know if they're directly contributing to micro G. I'd assume that they probably are doing some help with that, but it's a third party component, and it's a major component to make it work, like for notifications and applications to work that you're downloading, third party through Aurora or something like that. But so like I said, I'm kind of high level here, but I can try to hang as much as possible where we deep dive, and I'm definitely all ears.
Okay, so the micro G itself is what makes CalyxOS slightly less secure. Well, probably more depending on your opinion, on anyone's opinion, but the micro G is not the most secure implementation of Google Play services that you can have. It's probably even more secure to have just the Google Play services themselves, but let's not. I'll address that separately. The correction number one, This is the important one. You said something like that Android was not built for privacy, or in mind it was built to track as much as of your data as possible.
Yes, 100%.
This no, this is not true.
And this is where
Okay,
you and I are probably going to have a disagreement, because I've seen your video, and I would argue that Apple, if you're going to compare Apple to Google Android, like what you get on a Galaxy S22 or whatever, is going to be more secure and privacy respecting than Google is.
So you're saying that Google on a Google on an iPhone would be more secure than Google on a Samsung device?
No. I just meant that, like, when I say Android, I'm talking about Google's build of Android. Google's build.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are two different subtopics here: privacy and security. I would argue that Android is going to be very secure, absolutely 100%, right? And I wouldn't even say more than Apple or less than Apple. They're just going to be very secure. But by design, its purpose is to get in the hands of as many people as possible, to collect as much information as possible. And a perfect example of this would be compare Apple Maps to Google Maps. How much data collection is actually being stored, how much of it's being randomized or not randomized on location history, and being able to look at these things objectively, saying from a privacy standpoint specifically, I would say that Android is designed to be as least private as possible.
Right. So Google Maps is not Android. It's not in the AOSP. So this is not
okay. If we're talking about AOSP, I will walk some of that back. Again, I'm talking about when I see Android, I'm more thinking about like what people think. Like, I just go buy an Android phone from the store and I start using it. Like, if you're talking about AOSP, yes, very different. But okay, yeah, we weren't exactly aligned on the same understanding there. But yeah, so then I would definitely walk a lot of that back from that.
Because when you say Android, I know that a lot of people have different things in their mind. Android is a very broad ecosystem, but when I say Android, I just mean the most modern version of that operating system. I don't mean the broad ecosystem where you can have like a $100 Chinese phone that's like Android 6 or whatever.
Right, sure. Okay. Yeah, because
that's not, yeah.
And I know you've mentioned this on one of your previous videos, that it kind of sucks for the people who can't afford really good phones, because when they buy the phone from day one, they're pretty much screwed as far as, security goes, and how quick those builds come out for those lower tier phones than, say, the top tier flagship devices. If you're referring to Android, or if the question from the person who submitted the question was talking about Android AOSP, then yeah, arguably that's probably the most secure and probably private ROM that exists, assuming there's no Google apps installed and you're not having to log in with a Google ID. Then yeah, I would correct myself there.
Okay. So I would still say that Android itself, whether we want to say with the Google services or not, is pretty secure on its own. The problem with the privacy with data collection on Android is mostly that the services that you're using are being granted permissions that collect your data. But in most cases, or in a lot of cases, you have a lot of choice in how much data you want to expose yourself to. And the problem with Android is that there are so many different vendors making their own version of it that they install their bloatware and they make it really hard or impossible to disable it or uninstall it. Even though on pretty much all modern Android phones, you are able to do it with ADB, and it's pretty simple, but I guess most people are not gonna do it. The problem with the broad statement that I have that Android is built to collect as much data as possible is that it's a bit misleading. You can say that about Google, like Google is a company that wants to collect your data, But even Google itself is now implementing a lot of protocols and mechanisms that try to protect your data as much as possible. So, for example, the Pixel phones from Pixel 2 and up have a feature called Now Playing or something like that. It's like it's going to tell you what the name of the song is that is being played around it, around your device. And that is happening on device. There is no data collection there. Google built this for their phones so that it's private, right? The same thing for Gboard. Gboard doesn't collect your keystrokes, right? So Gboard is actually a privacy respecting keyboard for Android if you don't mind that it's closed source, which I do, so I don't use Gboard. But Gboard uses federated learning, so it means that there is a learning model that's in the cloud, but when the learning model arrives to your phone, the algorithm is updated with your input, but the input itself is not sent to the cloud. Only the update is sent to the algorithm, and then the update that your phone submitted to the algorithm is then grouped together in what's called cohort. And a cohort is any number of other updates. It could be 100 or thousands of other updates. And those are grouped together and calculations are made on those. And those cohorts are stored in the cloud. So Google actually pretty much randomizes your data as much as possible. Now, Google also does differential privacy, and Apple also does differential privacy. So differential privacy is applied to information that they collect from your device and store in their data centers. And the way differential privacy was designed it was that you would have epsilon values, and the higher the value is, the worse the privacy invasion is. And differential privacy is an algorithm that tries to make it mathematically impossible to find individuals in any given data set. So it's basically just a data anonymization or randomization. So Google does differential privacy in a very open source manner. It's completely open source. That's how it should be. That's how the implementation was originally intended to be designed. I'm sorry. And they also publish their values. So Google's values are around number 2, which is not optimal. It would be better if it was under 1. But Apple does not publish their values, and they also do not open source their implementation of differential privacy, which defeats the purpose of even having differential privacy in the first place, other than you want to mention in your marketing material. There was a study on Apple's implementation of differential privacy, and for iPhones, their epsilon value was 14, and for Mac, like Mac OS, it was 9. So significantly worse than Google's implementation of differential privacy. So you did say that Google Maps is like collecting more data than Apple Maps, and that's why Apple Maps is worse. However, Google is also going to implement differential privacy or federated learning into Google Maps as well. And also, I'm not going to mention that, it doesn't matter. Okay, so that's kind of like my take. Like it's a very broad subject, so I just want to know that I just want to explain to people that there are these incredible little nuances in each of these systems that you can dive so deeply into. Like you can talk for hours about just any of these algorithms and protocols and any of their implementations. Yeah. So it's kind of like a dig move on my part to try to correct you when you were trying to be concise and comprehensive.
I was comparing it to the Google Android experience that most people will probably experience with your off-the-shelf, low-tier, or even flagship devices as out of the box, compared to using GrapheneOS, CalyxOS, or Linux, or other ROMs. And I know that the reason why I said the maps was I was interested. I did some research and trying to understand Apple Maps and data collection. And they state on their website, that they convert precise location from your device from the origin to less exact locations after 24 hours. They have different navigational tools that are on device and not relying on Apple. I'm not advocating for Apple here. I'm just saying they do say that they try to mitigate as much of the privacy concerns around the navigational part. Maps was like a great example. Whereas on Google, if you've ever used Google's, where you log into your Google account and you can see for like the last several years, like basically every to the pinpoint location where you've been. It just seems like I don't know. I mean, neither of them are good options from a privacy standpoint. It's just that out of the gate, I guess my biggest question that no one could answer except people at Apple is, what is Apple doing with all of the information, right? Because I feel like they're the sleeping giant. Like they kind of, their whole slogan is, what stays on your phone, stays on your phone, whatever, all this security propaganda, or privacy propaganda. I call it propaganda because it's like, well, we just have to believe you. We don't really know what you're going to do. They're trying to funnel all of your traffic from your device through their servers with private relay, which is not on by default, but it might be on by default in a later build down the road. And what that does is that, they say it's, they try to protect your privacy by not exposing your exact location or your search history. It's basically a massive VPN, right? It goes through Apple servers and does the request. They implemented, hide my email and all these different features for privacy, but Apple knows all of it. So again, all your eggs in that one basket. And the same with Google. If you're using the standard Google applications that come on an Android phone, a retail phone. And so when I was comparing the two, I was kind of comparing the two out of the box, whereas at least, okay, with Apple, they're definitely collecting all this data, but we don't really know what they're going to do with it, if they do anything with it. Whereas Google's very open about what they, kind of more open about what they do with it and selling access. And when I say that, access to the data through their platform. So like you can open up an AdWords account and run ads and get incredibly targeted by age, location, demographic, interest, income level, orientation, all these different things because they have all of that info. Apple doesn't have that. It doesn't mean they won't at some point. I think they might launch a search engine. I think they might launch an ad platform like that. Now, I know that there's ad networks that tie into their stuff for their apps and everything, but the granularity that you get with Google just blows my mind, that they have not only just collect this information, but it's cataloged in such a way that can be sliced, if you're looking at all of these different things as dimensions, sliced down to very specific individuals. It's not like they're selling you the name and number of that person, but they're selling access to that because of the amount of information that they collect. And that from that standpoint, that's where I was saying, like, I feel at this point in time that from a privacy standpoint, vanilla, comparing one against the other, not AOSP, but just standard Android build for an Android device for a retail consumer, I would lean more towards Apple from just the privacy standpoint. But that doesn't mean I feel that Apple is a good choice for privacy at all. I advocate away from that, and so the part of that was just my misunderstanding. And when Android is really AOSP, and I would agree with what you're saying there, because I think that they probably put more focus on security in that core build than anything else, and then everything gets layered in on top, right? So. Really, phones are bad. Just burn your phone.
I mean, phones are better than desktops. So if you want to burn your phone, you should definitely start with your
with your desktop first. That's probably fair.
Yeah. Then your TV, then your microwave, then your fridge, and stuff like that. Your car too. Definitely burn your car.
Live in a teepee and fish for your food. Yeah.
Your phone should be the last thing that you should burn. It should definitely be all these things before you burn your your phone. But the listener also asked, like, why is GrapheneOS more secure than Linux? Like, it's really funny because like the difference is like more than night and day, right? So Linux doesn't even have a security model, and what this means is that any app that you install on Linux has access to all the data of the user. So that means that every app has access to each other's app. So if you get any sort of malware on your Linux or any sort of application, they can just collect all of your data and it's over, right? So
Yeah.
Linux does nothing for your security pretty much. You have to even the things that you can install like Fire jail or some sort of like sandboxing tools, like they're not really sandboxing, whereas Android went out of its way, and GrapheneOS even more so, to make sure that all of the apps are so properly sandboxed that they don't have access to anything unless they are being granted permission
Right.
specifically.
You'd have
And
to have
you're
like a CubeOS build for a phone, and that would be fantastically complicated and not even really usable in order to consider something like Linux for a phone OS. You'd have to have something that's so sanitized and with no access, no gateway to that, like at the kernel level, that then manages everything in its own containerized environment down to the every single app. So each app would have its own kernel running just for that, its own user bin directory for its libraries, for the application. You know what I mean? It would be like ridiculous. I don't I don't think that that's really feasible in today's time. Even using CubeOS on a beefy machine with a lot of RAM is clunky. Uh,
yeah
you need a lot of resource to provide an environment that secure, that it wouldn't be beneficial to you because it would drain the battery so fast because it needs to keep all this stuff in RAM. It just yeah, I don't see how that would be. I'm not saying it's never possible. I know that and I actually am still expecting to receive my Librem 5 at some point, which is by Purism. I ordered it back in, I think it was like 2018, late 2018, something like that. They're already on like a second revision of it. So I'm supposed to get it sometime this summer, at least the last email I got from Purism. And again, it's like because I wanted to try it. I wanted to get my hands on it. I want to see what it's like. And that is a Linux phone. But how good is the security? I don't imagine nearly as good as AOSP. Not even by like you said, night and day difference. I didn't mean to cut you off. Sorry. It just I was thinking about the layers to what it would actually take to have a Linux device like a phone that secure, and I just my head exploded because you would need some.
yeah like there are even things that you can see, like if you want to share some sort of file between apps, like for example, you want to share a photo you took with a social media app, Facebook, whatever, you want to send it over a messaging app, you actually have to go through a dialogue that walks you through the sharing process on your phone. And you don't even think about how seamless it is, but it's actually, if this was on the desktop, it would be a pain in the ass and nobody would want to do it. And that is because all the apps on the desktop are sharing your data, so you don't even have to do it. Like they already have access to it because it's it's based on the assumption that, well, the desktop has a user, and therefore all of the apps that are on the desktop all automatically have the same access to all system files and all of app files as the user. And this is not how Android treats data on your phone. Android protects their data. It doesn't assume that because you're a user of your phone, therefore every app on your phone and every process is going to have access to every data that's on your phone. It's going to be strictly sandboxed, and you're going to be informed before you install and even throughout the use of the application how your data is what permissions the application is requesting and using, and you can limit that to a very great extent. And the biggest benefit of GrapheneOS is that it is hardening this model. It is making it even more difficult for applications to request access. And one of the two things that I like about GrapheneOS having over both Android and iOS is because is the two permission toggles. That's a network toggle and a sensor toggle. So a network toggle is actually an extremely powerful firewall that completely blocks network access to any app that you want. And this is not existent in iOS or Android. And that's awesome because you can use an app that could potentially be a privacy compromise, but you can block its access to the internet, and you can still use that app. And the sensors toggle is very important, and it's also non-existent on the iOS at all. It does exist on the Android system, but it's only through the developer options, which you can enable if you want to. And the reason that sensor toggle is very important to disable sensors for an app is because sensors can be used to transmit data in a very low bandwidth bit rate, and that data can be extremely sensitive. It could be like your one-time passwords, it could be your identifiers, it could be plenty of other stuff, and it could be it is completely permissionless on the iOS and Android, meaning that you are not going to be even aware of that it's happening. There's not going to be any notification or any sort of window or screen on your phone that's telling you that an app is using sensor in any way whatsoever. So GrapheneOS is doing this. GrapheneOS is also giving you like full MAC address randomization, making your device completely anonymous on all networks because it treats all Wi-Fi networks as hostile. iOS and Android don't have this. They do have some randomization, but it's only based on new network connections. GrapheneOS gives you a new MAC address every time you reconnect to this same network, which there's going to be no record of you connected to any particular network whatsoever, temporal or location-wise. So that's an awesome addition. There are plenty of others, and you could like write a page or a book even maybe about the differences between GrapheneOS and Android and iOS and other desktop operating systems and ROMs.
Right. Yeah.
I hope that we answered the question to the user, to the listener very well.
Yeah. Basically, just use GrapheneOS is what you're saying. Yeah. Just.
Yeah. Yeah, but the only thing that I actually wanted to mention is that you mentioned how CalyxOS is guiding a user through a installation setup where they can choose to install like microG or F-Droid, and you actually notice that GrapheneOS has implemented an app repository for like integration of Google Play services. Right. So this actually works better now. It's better for security. So it's more secure to have that because now you have the option for your GrapheneOS if you want to install Google Play services for whatever reason you want to, because maybe an app that you want to use needs it. A lot of banking apps need that, for example.
Right.
But GrapheneOS does it in a way that doesn't compromise your security, because if you install Play services on the Android, they're going to have privileged permissions. They're going to have access to a lot of app data, but on GrapheneOS, they're going to be completely sandboxed. They're not going to have any privileged permissions. They're not going to know any special information about your device. They're just going to act like any regular app on your phone, and you're still going to be able to take advantage of the services that Google provides to some of the apps on the Play Store.
Right.
And you will be able to install apps from the Play Store.
And it works fantastically well. I've been using between GrapheneOS and CalyxOS both pretty heavily and exclusively recently, but pretty heavily for the last probably 2.5 to 3 years, somewhere in there. And the reason why I was curious to try CalyxOS was GrapheneOS did not have this feature before. You would have had to have installed microG, on your own on GrapheneOS to get a lot of that functionality. Whereas because CalyxOS had it baked into it, not baked in, you select whether or not you want it set up during the installation process. Actually, once CalyxOS is installed, like the first setup process of the screens is when you say like yes, enable micro G, and it takes you to a couple steps. If you want to do a pin lock or whatever, and then it has the option for like these default apps that you can deselect or select as you want. They don't just ram it in there. You can say whether or not you want to install F-Droid, Aurora, Orbot, a handful of others. Calyx has their own VPN clients too, or like a VPN client and like a firewall, so you can opt for those to be installed. So the user experience is compared to the previous version of GrapheneOS before Google Sandbox, features. CalyxOS was definitely more user friendly to initially get it working and working for you. With GrapheneOS, you would have already had to have information to know to go download F-Droid. Go to fdroid.org. Then go download Aurora through F-Droid. Then you could go ahead and get some apps. You mentioned the banking app. I just talked about that on my recent podcast where I said I was actually using a bank app to deposit a check, and I couldn't even log into the app because it was out of date. So I went to Aurora store to update it, and Aurora was like, no apps were loading. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? So then I realized, I got to go to F-Droid and update Aurora, so then I can get to the updated apps, get the updated app for the banking app, then update the banking. It's like, this kind of chain reaction of things. It's not a big deal, but you have to be knowledgeable about that to understand that that's what's happening. And there's not like a message that pops up and says, hey, go update, Aurora and F-Droid. You have to figure it out. With GrapheneOS, with the Sandbox, Google Play, and Google Store functionality, is far and away superior to any device using micro G. Not just from a security standpoint and a privacy standpoint, but also from a usability. It's the trifecta. And I can say this because I use them both, and so I know, like, definitively it's better experience. If the idea is to get people off of a Google Android build or away from iOS and to use something that is going to be remotely close to the same experience, we need these types of integrations so that you're not wanting to throw your phone across the room, because it can be very frustrating. Sometimes you have to go update F-Droid to then update Aurora to then go update your apps. You're also, and if your Aurora Store app isn't up to date, it's not going to pull recent updates, which might be a security vulnerability for you automatically, because it can't. And the Aurora Store I was talking about on the previous episode of Closed Network was sometimes you go to look for an app and you can't find it, and you're thinking like, I guess I just can't get it. It's because it's picking your location, I think, out of France, which is where the Aurora servers are, I believe, according to the CalyxOS testers group and their Matrix chat room. That's what I learned. I don't know if that's 100% verifiable. I haven't verified it, but that's what I understood. So then you had to go in and change your network setting to allow location awareness or whatever it's called. Enable that, log out of Aurora, then back into it. Then you could download your Bank of America or Cash App. It's like, so, when you're trying to get these devices in the hands of people that you care about, or you're being an advocate for using these, it's like you also are going to become their tech support, right? My brother, I got him to switch over to Graphene. He's using Calyx right now, and I've had to kind of like explain a lot of this stuff to him because there's no other way to know. It's like not very what am I trying to say? It's not very clear what to do, what direction to go when you're troubleshooting. And people aren't used to having to troubleshoot their phone. It just always works. So that's why I've been so excited to use GrapheneOS with these, new feature set that they have with these Sandbox Google services, because I can still feel comfortable using the apps. And I try to keep my apps to a minimum, but there are some that I need to use. Banking apps are one of them, and a credit card app, right? So I'm just explaining that and hopefully people understand. I'm not bashing CalyxOS. These are my real world firsthand user experiences from a person who has used iPhones since the iPhone 4, right? So, and I've used Android devices along the way as well. But, I get the frustration if you're coming over and you're trying to, improve your life by using some of these recommendations, and then you get stuck in these hangups. It can be frustrating. And if you're not a tech, passionate person, the patience isn't always as long as someone who someone like us who's willing to troubleshoot and put in a lot of time. You just want the damn thing to work. So I'll have to give my hat off to Daniel McKay and the team, because they're killing it with that functionality.
Yeah, I'm always astonished how they can always figure out a way to make it even better. I thought it was perfect the first time I installed it, but they are just making it better and better, both in terms of security and feature set. By the way, do you have any like listener questions on your part?
Um, I do have one, but I'll have to go back and find it another time, because it was in an audio format
Okay.
and I don't remember exactly where it was. So I do apologize for that.
That's no problem. We can definitely do it some other time. And if listeners have any questions, like you can submit them in the comments on YouTube, on Reddit, or in closed network email, or the voicemail, I guess, or voice message. And yeah, we are definitely happy to pick a question that is relevant to the topics that we are discussing, and it does help us to like navigate through the mess of all of the information that is out there in a way that is helpful to the audience, so that audience can learn in a way that they would understand this information the best. So definitely do this, and we are reading your comments.
Reading terms and service and reading your comments. I actually trying to log in real quick to see if I could pull it up real fast. And let me. Oh, okay. I might have actually been able to pull it up. Yeah, actually, I do. It was just March 30th. Let me play it.
Hey, is there an advice to convince people that they have to care about their privacy on the digital world so that they can start taking actions? And thank you for making this podcast. I really enjoy your collaboration with the Hated One.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. I knew I wanted to. I didn't play it on the Closed Network because it came in from a listener who listened to us on your YouTube channel. So, kind of a general question about advocating for privacy, and I think the easiest way is just to get them to listen. go to the Hated One. Get them to go to the Hated One YouTube channel and just watch some videos. It is kind of hard to get people to care, especially when they know how passionate you are about it, that you don't come off as like a crazy person. I think that's my biggest fear, is that people think I'm a crazy person because I want to evangelize, privacy awareness, and walking the line between not looking like a crazy person or sounding like one. And, it's like, well, everyone's spying on you, and you have to, burn your laptop and burn your Gmail account. It's like, I try to have a very like tactful approach. I think there's steps and levels to an awakening, if you equate it to like being unplugged from the matrix or something, to come to the realization that companies are in it for the money and not in it for your well-being. They're in it for your well-being is from a user experience, so that you continue using the services, but the intent is to leverage the user base and the data to make even more money, because that's the only way that it makes sense. That's how these companies become worth $1 trillion or $2 trillion. Is, if you were to go back and tell yourself 10 years ago or 20 years ago that phone companies would be, and I say phone companies, they're more than that. I get that. But phone company service providers, right, would be worth more than most major corporations on the planet. it would be like, huh? Like, how does that make sense? You know? And how do they get there? How do they get to that upper echelon of value when at the end of the day they literally provide services for laptops, tablets, and cell phones? Especially when it's been so commoditized from a device hardware market wise. It's like they're really not probably making a ton of money on the devices. I'm sure they are, in some, especially flagship devices. But the idea that you could buy a phone for $100 or $200, you would, have to, like, how do you make money? And it's exactly, it's not very apparent. And I think people use technology without thinking one iota about what the trade-off is. It's just, this is something I need, and I'll just sign up and I'll click through the end user license agreements. I'll agree. Here's my name. Here's my information. Here's my address. Here's my credit card number. So it's just like this, like, mental conditioning over a long period of time, and that's a really hard thing to compete with.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there is a universal advice that applies to everyone, but because like we mostly speak to like North American audience, I guess, or pretty Western audience. But like you go to Germany, for example, and everyone is paranoid about their privacy. Not to the extent that we are, like you and I, but everyone is using cash because they don't like how credit card companies are tracking your transactions. But then you go to Sweden and it's the exact opposite. Like there is no cash. It's as cashless society as it can get. Everyone is using apps on their phones that track their locations and all the information, and everyone is trusting the big tech. It's a completely different mentality. But at least what works for me, and I guess this is how I would advocate it in real life to other people as well, is that, well, I don't want to be abused. I really do fear abuse. And that goes for all kinds of things. Like, I don't want to be abused by, like, if I'm in a bad relationship, but also, like, if there's a data breach and it exposes, let's say, like, my financial history, financial records, or my health record, and then my employer fires me because they find that, I don't know, I'm prone to some disease genetically. Like, let's say my genetic code is exposed to the internet because I submitted a DNA test to some of these DNA companies, and now they think that, oh well, in a few years I might have like a 30% chance of getting some sort of a disease, and now they're gonna fire me because they don't want to have that liability. And it doesn't even matter whether I get that disease or not. But people are just gonna be making these decisions. They're gonna be making assumptions about the data that they're reading about you, and you have no say over that once it's over, or once it's exposed. There are plenty of cases where people have lost their life relationships because of the data that have been exposed on public database breaches. There have been cases where people have been unjustly investigated by the police and exposed as suspects in criminal cases. Their lives have been ruined because of this, and simply because at the time of a crime, more or less, they were walking in a proximate location to the crime scene, and with their phone, and their phone in the background was recording their location, and the police then went to Google and Apple and requested location information on all of the phones that were in that area, in that proximity, and they decided to go after you for whatever reason. You're completely innocent, but now your life is ruined. And there, you can even find these cases. There's a case of a guy who is suing his city for more than $1 million because he lost his job, he lost his car because of this case, but he also lost his wife. And now his face is like the first thing that pops up on Google search is his face being linked to a murder case that he had no part in. And it was someone else, and that someone else was already convicted. but it's over. It's out there. It's on the internet. It's in the Google search, and it's not even correct. It's it's verifiably wrong. That people are going to be making these horrible decisions based on your data, and they're gonna. I call this abuse. It's a very broad use of the term, but if anyone has access to your information, they're gonna abuse that against your interest, your best interest, and that's I guess what people should be trying to prevent.
There's definitely some very sensitive cases where there's been breaches of data. There's a couple. I was looking for the particular story, but where mental health records have been held for ransom on patients, and if they didn't pay, the contents of the notes of these patients, which have their names and all this other information around it, would be released if they didn't pay the ransom. And these are people's deepest, darkest secrets that they've told their therapists about, family stuff, marriage stuff, work stuff, all sorts of stuff. You would only, it's kind of like you believe you have this like doctor-patient privilege where everything you talk about is within confidence. But these notes on these patients were kept electronically and stored in a central server. And that was, the attack vector for this hacker group, and to take it, for ransom. And if they didn't, they would release all this information, which they did. They ended up releasing it all. I think it was Vastamo, Vastamo. No, that was individual. I'll have to link to the story. I'll put the link in there. But it's sad because on the podcast, I tell people you need to kind of operate with the understanding that any input from you into a web page or an app, you have to look at it as like, it's not a matter of if, but just when this information is going to get released. Whether it's accessed illegally, whether it's an internal espionage thing or internal sabotage, or it's a hack, or just bad security and something's left wide open. It's sad because you want to feel like what you're doing is protected, like the information you're giving is protected, especially in that context. Someone's in a room with somebody and sharing all their deepest, darkest secrets to get better, right? They're there for mental health, and then this information could be used against them. They are actually going after the patients when they couldn't get the money. I heard about this on the Hacked podcast, which is a fun guilty pleasure I have listening to that podcast. It's pretty interesting. And so I started doing some research. This is probably a year ago now. But it's like, that's really frightening, to think that could happen to people. And it does happen to people. So, I think it's one of those things where a lot of people get really relaxed about things until something happens to them, and then they become vigilant. And sometimes it could just be someone opened a credit card in your name, they hijacked your identity for something, and then you start getting ultra, vigilant about your data. You maybe start freezing your credit reports, and you start changing your passwords and taking that more seriously. And so, you can only tell so many stories, but if they fall on deaf ears, I don't think there's a lot you can do until something bad happens, unfortunately. I know that's terrible to say, but be an advocate for the people you care about, I think, is probably the easiest way to start. I've done that with my own family and friends, and that's by doing things like, hey, I know we kind of knock on Signal, but that's kind of an easy way, an easy gateway in. Hey, download Signal. We should use that. It's and encrypt it. Then it kind of, you start, hey, you should use a password manager. Let me show you how to set it up. Hey, maybe you should start using email aliases. Maybe you should start using identity aliases. Not because you're trying to hide who you are, but because at some point who you are will become exposed to every bad actor on the internet. And that could be the main privacy angle to play. I mean, I remember the very first episode we did together. I mean, it's not like there's been 100. This is the third, but the first one we did, it was kind of like introduction and why do you care about privacy? Who are you hiding from? And, I had a different answer, but this is also another huge component, is that you kind of have to really protect your information, because it's just a matter of time before it ends up in some data leak somewhere and on a paste bin, or on a raid forum thread or whatever. It's kind of like, because you can't see it happening in real time, like when someone's breaking into your car or your house, and if it's ever happened to you, you feel so like violated, like, oh my gosh, someone was in my home, going through my things, taking my things. Like, it's just a real gross violation of your personal, privacy in your space. But for some reason, when it happens like in the digital space, because you don't see it, it doesn't have quite the same feel. It doesn't hit people quite the same. And I think it's really hard to draw that feeling of the break-in to a data theft, or something. Everyone's probably received a letter at some point in time, or email, hey, your information was exposed. We'll offer you 6 months for free of credit monitoring reporting, which is like a total joke. Yeah, but it's more common than it ever once was before, and I think that it's going to continue to get worse.
Yeah, and like, if you want to know about more cases of extreme privacy violations, then just go to Michael Bazzell, and he has like plenty of stories of people that he needed to help disappear completely. And in many cases, these people were never able to communicate with some of their closest friends and family members because they couldn't rely on them anymore. And not because they were the privacy violator or invader, but because they didn't have the tools or even willingness to learn the privacy techniques, and it became a risk for the victim. So they had to just cut the content. This is something that actually happens in the privacy community quite often. Like, for me, I decided to delete myself off of the internet, and that meant that I couldn't keep my contacts with people. So I gave them my Proton mail address, but those contacts, they kept their Gmail address. It's like, well, I cannot communicate with you. I mean, you have my address, but I'm not going to tell you anything because, whatever I say is going to stay in Google's inbox, in Google's service forever.
Right.
And in probably some other servers as well when it comes to the NSA.
And if you get a new mobile number, right, and you give it to someone and they're not storing in their phone as like a nickname for you, they put it in as your first and last name. Well, all it takes is for them to go download TikTok or whatever, and it's like, hey, would you like to see if your friends are online? And they share their contact book with their address book with one of these service providers, and boom, now that service provider, what could be Facebook, TikTok, whoever, has now your name and your number, even if you don't have an account, and they will create a unique identifier for that entry. And then they can correlate to anyone else who's uploaded the same contact information to other users, and they can see association. It's like, putting all the people on a wall and putting the yarn up, connecting all the dots. But it's a database, right? And those database tables have records of all this stuff, and then they can draw these associations. So even if you are going out of your way to not be in any of these like social database, social platform databases, your information's still in there. It's like, so. Yeah,
that's an excellent point. Like, you cannot just think about yourself. You have to think about the people that are in your contacts and what kind of information they have on you and how secure or not that is. So, like, it would be a lot easier if everybody had some basic understanding of this, and if everyone had some standard level of privacy and security in their lives. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And people that do need that extreme level of privacy and anonymity, they just have to isolate themselves because they have no other choice. So, like, even if someone thinks that nothing bad is ever going to happen to them, and they're not going to be exposed to any sort of abuse of their information, of their sensitive and private information, there's still a possible threat, an attack vector for someone in their surroundings, in their circle of friends or family, that they are endangering now because they are not caring of their privacy and not just of theirs, but also their friends and family. So like, even Michael Bazzell has so many stories about how like family members and friends have completely destroyed whatever he was trying to do with his clients, because like he was trying to set something up and their family member would just completely screw it up.
Right, and it's a lot of it's just lack of understanding of how things work. So like the contact thing, it's like, well, you when you create a contact, most people just put a first name, last name, and phone number. A lot of people will put in like their address and their birthday, and a lot of extra information, and they don't think about. It used to be you would write it down in a physical address book, or you'd have it, and you wouldn't just let anyone who wanted to Xerox it or make a photocopy of it, right? I just dated myself saying Xerox, but it's like, so treat it as if it's just as important as that is a book of very sensitive information that you don't want to expose to every app that you download on your phone. But it's a lifestyle change, though. It really is. Like I said, we've been mentally conditioned over the last decade or two that, like, it's asking for this, so I'll fill it out, and I'll put it in, and I'll, and that's something I kind of try to break the cycle on. If you sign up for something, give them garbage information. Give garbage information, and the more garbage information we all give, the better it is for everyone else's privacy, because it's garbage in, garbage out. So if it's not your real name, if it's an email alias, if it's a pseudo phone number, it's going to help in the long run, and you don't have any obligation to give these companies real information, And if they do, like they want to KYC you, like Facebook will often do, then it's time to leave. It's time to not use. Maybe it was time to never sign up to begin with, but at some point you gotta take a stand and say, like, I'm not gonna participate in this. What's the risk? Not what's the risk. What's the value proposition here? What am I really gonna be missing out on versus what I'm giving up? But anyway, yeah, it's a difficult question to answer plainly.
Yeah, but I think that we did squeeze as much as we could.
Yeah.
In this segment, what do you want to jump into for the next one? Do you want to possibly start a war between the two of us, or
always?
Do you want to go the safe route?
It's up to you. I mean, that's a pretty big topic, but I mean, I'm down. I think that because we've got. Yeah, it's up to you. I mean, I think there's some other questions in here as well, relating to like, Odysee, alternative platforms outside of, Bitcoin, VPNs for private, and privacy. Yeah, I'll just, wherever you want to go, I'm down.
All right. So I'm going to risk it with you, but I'm going to let you know that I really enjoy what you do, and I like you. You're pretty enjoyable. So no hard feelings, okay?
Not at all.
So
Not at all.
A lot of our listeners actually suggested plenty of blockchain companies and their products as a solution that we talked about like this utopian peer-to-peer network. And we were talking about Briar and Kutch as like these instant messengers that are trying to do essentially uncensorable like a messaging solution where people can just talk to each other from device to device without ever even relying on the backbone internet infrastructure. And I wanted to extend that to like everything, like, so it's not just device to device, but it's like its own mesh network, so that you could have the entire United States and Canada that could have this end-to-end communication without the communication ever going through a copper wire or cable, But a lot of people suggested blockchain, and I'm incredibly skeptical of blockchain solutions and cryptocurrency in general, even the biggest projects and the big daddy projects like Bitcoin and Monero, because I don't, like there's this like popular saying like Bitcoin fixes this and stuff like that. Like Bitcoin fixes everything. In my opinion, Bitcoin doesn't really fix anything, and like you can challenge me as much as you want. I really appreciate that because I'm very much open to changing my mind. And I was where you are. I was there. I was completely like, yeah, Bitcoin all the way. This is what's gonna do the thing. This is what's gonna bank the unbanked. That's the other one that I often say. But I just don't see that. What I see is some guy or group of people, maybe a girl or a woman, created a project that was very imperfect. It changed a couple of times since it was first launched in 2008. They tried to solve the problem where the Federal Reserve back in 2008 printed a lot of money, a lot less than it does today, but back then it was a lot of money, to bail out the big banks. And the big problem with this was that the Federal Reserve now completely like destroyed the value of the US dollar for the average everyday American citizen, and it did so to just prop up the big banks. And it did prop up the big banks because the Fed is actually pretty much run by the big banks. So Bitcoin was created with this goal in mind where there's always a limit to how many bitcoins there can be. And that's 21 million. And the thing is that there is always going to be less Bitcoin in circulation. So it essentially created a deflationary currency because every time somebody forgets Bitcoin, somebody sends the Bitcoin to an invalid address, or whatever happens, it's irreversible. So you're fucked. And I think that Bitcoin is essentially unusable as a currency, because why would you ever want to spend it if its value is only going to go up? Go ahead.
It's a good point. It's a good point. I agree with you. We can move on. No.
All right.
I actually, your points are valid, and it's hard to defend against the last point right now, which, from the currency aspect, because I spent a lot of time in what's been deemed as like Bitcoin Twitter, which is the cryptocurrency, primarily the Bitcoin people on Twitter, because I like to know use it as a gauge and just understand, and news and stuff like that. And the maximalist mentality is stack sats, and I fall into that same trap, right? Like, why would you want to spend it? Why would you want to use it as currency today when you wholeheartedly believe that if you hang out another 2 years, that it could potentially double or triple or exponentially increase in value? And I think that it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing, where it's like if people are using it more, it's easier to use it, but it's difficult to acquire more, especially with all the KYC requirements. So now it becomes even not just that it's a deflationary asset, call it, but it becomes harder to acquire it through non-KYC means. So now it becomes even more intrinsically valued to the individual because of the effort required to acquire it. So meaning like, okay, if I want more Bitcoin, but I don't want to go through an exchange and have my information tagged to that UTXO for that transaction, how can I get it otherwise? I could sell things for it online. I could, provide, professional services for crypto, but it's like the idea is that you want to acquire more and not spend it. And I think Monero is a little different in the sense that it's okay to spend, but it also has, this similar trait where it's like, well, I just want to acquire it, but I don't want to use it. And that's a hard one to argue against. I actually tried it use cryptocurrency online for products and services as much as I can. So whether it's registering a domain name or buying a Faraday bag or donating, I do, I enjoy using the Lightning Network for tipping, supporting creators and things like that. But if you're giving some up, you always have this voice in the back of your head that's like, don't forget to resupply, especially at around the same time. So it's worth the same when you got rid of it. This could go all the way back to the guy who spent the 10,000 Bitcoin to get the 2 pizzas, back in, 2012 or 13 or something like that. But does it solve all the problems? I definitely do not believe that it does. And I don't think blockchain is the answer, especially in the context of encrypted in messaging. A lot of times blockchain is introduced as a reward system to incentivize people to want to use the platform of whatever it is. And I think that can work for a lot of things, but I don't think that it would work well for something that's truly peer-to-peer. I think what we're seeing is kind of like what we've discussed in our previous episode together, which was the freedom and awesomeness of the early days of the internet. And it was cool and it was awesome. And I feel like cryptocurrency has kind of come around to the point where now everything's an AOL, a Prodigy, or a CompuServe. It's centralized. You can only get it through certain exchanges. It's highly regulated, or it's becoming more regulated than it ever has before. It's now on the first page in the United States for tax filings. And it starts to become this like big kind of like scary thing because people still don't quite understand what it is, how it works, but they know they want it. And it gets really murky. Now, I do believe that it is a threat to the powers that be, just like this centralized internet would be. And they meaning the authority, whether it's the Federal Reserve, whether it's regulators, whether it's banks or legislators, that feel threatened because it's something out of their control. It's like giving a Ferrari to a 15-year-old. It's like they have some basic knowledge of what they're doing and what it is. It's a vehicle, but it's like, oh my gosh, they start to panic, like a parent would panic. And I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all solution. I don't think you can just say Bitcoin solves everything, Bitcoin solves this. I think that it's easier to look at it from that perspective if you are in a third world country or underdeveloped country or a corrupt country, because it can enable you to trade value in a trustless environment, if you will, without any purview by the deciders. The deciders meaning their government, or so if something is banned or you can't use it or your money is worth shit in that country, but you have ways to acquire cryptocurrency that I think it actually can open up opportunities and enrich people's lives in a way that they've never really been able to experience before, in reference to the bank the unbanked. But in westernized world civilizations where you have access to bank accounts and credit cards and Venmo and Cash App and all these other ways to pay for things, it just seems like yet another way to pay for something potentially. And if it has this ability to gain so much value, especially when there's rampant inflation currently on the US dollar, then why would I want to get rid of it? So I think of it as like more of a hedge against a hyperinflation of our existing currency more than a currency replacement. That's my personal feeling. Though I do try to use it and I try to support the infrastructure because at its core, when I say that, I mean by like running Bitcoin nodes and Lightning nodes and participating, right? Just like running a Tor relay node. I try to support the infrastructure because I believe in the ethos, but I don't always know where it's going. I believe in the ethos as far as the original white paper, a trustless digital cash, right? But it's not really a digital cash because it's not really. It's not something that people want to spend. They just want to stack. And I get that. To the point now where you could make the argument that there's more liability holding cash than any other commodity or a currency or commodity. because it's inflating at such a fast pace. So I think knowing that, how would you incentivize to use something that people don't actually want to give up to use a platform? And therefore, I think that there would have to be a different way to go about it. Not to mention that most of, I don't want to overuse like the shitcoin term or whatever, but I really don't care about other cryptocurrencies. I am, a fan of Bitcoin. I am also a fan of Monero, but I kind of feel like a lot of these projects are vaporware for these blockchain companies that are trying to create a solution. I feel like what they've done is they've come up with an idea and they want to make money. So how do we shoehorn a token into it and call it a blockchain solution for, I don't know, whatever, supply chain management or whatever, media delivery, bandwidth, avenues for rich media. There's all these different projects, and they tokenize it because they see it as an opportunity to make money. So if the only way that I could see that blockchain could be used for an incentive program is if there was no central authority or organization that directly benefited from its use. I don't really see how that would come about. It's wildly complicated, and it's still I wouldn't say in its infancy, but it's definitely in an adolescent stage, in my opinion. Just like the 15-year-old with the Ferrari, like we don't really know what direction this thing's going to go. Surely it has a ton of benefits. In my opinion, it's just as cool as the invention of the internet. It does allow for anti-censorship, it provides censorship-resistant means of transferring value. That is pretty amazing to me. It's really wild to think that you could send value to somebody on the other side of the planet or across the room without asking permission, like doing a wire transfer, or without exposing the identities beyond, those two parties. Not even those two parties don't even have to know who they are. Yes, I know you can trace transactions on the blockchain. It's an open ledger. I'm talking more about just, at the philosophical level. In order to use Bitcoin in a privacy respecting way, you kind of have to know exactly what you're doing. And I think that's part of my other problem, is that it is an open ledger. So if your wallet has been linked to a KYC transaction, then that will follow you, and you can start to correlate that information. There's a lot of companies out there that specialize in this. So you kind of have to be savvy to use Bitcoin if you're trying to be ultra private and I don't want to say ultra secure, but just ultra private. Secure would just be like control your own keys, right? Your private keys for your wallets. Be in control of them at all times. Use cold storage. But I won't. That's more like how to use it. When I say that you have to be pretty savvy, is you have to be aware of running like a Dojo server using a CoinJoin service, right? So something like Samurai Wallet's one of the ones that I like to use with a Dojo server that's running on my own Raspberry Pi, that I can mix UTXOs with other people's Bitcoin to help anonymize or break the chain of the ledger, break the chain of association. Most people aren't going to do that. So it's like they can, and we advocate for it, but it's not an easy onboarding to set that up. So if you're going to have a peer-to-peer, trustless, decentralized communication platform, but it's reliant on a cryptocurrency, I kind of look at that as your potential weak point. That's the weak link in the chain, if you will, because that's going to be the factor, that's going to be the angle that's going to be exploited through something like this. That's why I feel like it can't be reliant on blockchain. I think blockchain is awesome. It's cool. I love Bitcoin. I love what it represents, but I honestly don't know. I'm not saying I don't believe. I don't know how you would use a reward system that relies on a blockchain network that's tokenized that's completely decentralized. I mean, people might say, well, you could use Monero. Monero still has a project. They have people that make decisions. They make changes to the algorithm, to be anti-ASIC, mineable and things like that. But so there's always people that are going to be in a position of like making choices. Now, generally, they're making choices that are good for the user and for the community. But how do you ensure that? How do you ensure that's always the case now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and so on and so forth? That's the $1 million question, and I don't really know the answer to that. We probably won't actually argue as much as maybe we thought, because I don't really, as much as a crypto like fan and supporter and advocate that I am, you're talking at a scale that's far beyond my understanding and from an implementation standpoint. I think it'd be fantastically complicated, but I think the whole project is fantastically complicated. It's something that I desperately want to see come to fruition.
Well, I generally don't see the project is going in any sort of positive direction. I think it has been hijacked by a very toxic influence, especially from people who are just interested in the price of Bitcoin going up and nothing else. Sort of like the value of Bitcoin is completely manipulated on the market by Tether right now and other stable coins. It's completely like there's like no transparency. Like nobody really knows how many Tethers are actually propped up or pegged at all. It's likely that the vast majority of them aren't at all. Like they're just printed out of thin air. So now we are actually on the blockchain, and we are facing the same problems that we have been facing with the US dollar or just fiat currencies. And the problem is that with the US dollar and other fiat currencies, you could argue that even though they are controlled by central banks, there is still some sort of democratic accountability there. It's not like they can just, it's not like the people don't have absolutely anything to say about that. Like the US Congress could technically make laws and people could pressure the US Congress. Whether that's going to happen, it's up to the
Are you talking
the people
about,
to decide.
Are you talking about like audit? Like, are you talking about like auditing the Fed? Like,
Yeah, or changing the Fed's policy. Like the Fed doesn't really listen to anyone except for the big banks, but you could technically force that change if you wanted to. You could technically write different laws. It's still beholden to the laws. It's not like the Fed is writing its own laws, or other central banks for that matter. But they are a little bit separate because they're trying to be apolitical. They're trying to serve the economic interest the most. However, Bitcoin, it created this proof of work system that is so inefficient, and it is so bad at just managing itself. Is like it's never gonna scale under this system. It's gonna have to change, and it has changed since it was launched, and it just keeps hitting the ceiling, and it's just being blocked by this barrier. And it used to be the case, like at the beginning of Bitcoin mining, it was pretty decentralized. Like you could just plug in your computer and you could mine Bitcoin. But now you can't do that. Like you plug in your computer and nothing changes. Like this is the problem. Like it created a system where the more people participate in it, the less efficient it becomes. It's pretty backwards. Like and even like they say, well, it's decentralized, therefore it's censorship resistant. But that is not necessarily the case. There is, I can't just remember the acronym. There is some sort of international regulatory scheme that basically forces mining pools to censor or throttle Bitcoin transactions that are blacklisted in this scheme. And there are plenty of...
yeah.
I'm sorry?
Oh, that is correct. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And they can do this even without the 51% control of the Bitcoin blockchain. So it is possible to censor Bitcoin transactions without controlling the majority of the hash rate. And also, there are quote unquote layer 2 solutions built on top of blockchain. And I'm just going to say it. Everything that's layer 2 is centralization. That's completely like throwing like all of the decentralized blockchain out of the water. Like it's just like central banks and centralized financial payment processors and systems. That's layer 2 solutions. And at that point, like, what's even the purpose of having a blockchain if we need to have the layer 2 solutions in order for the blockchains to be usable?
How is the layer 2 solution centralized for Bitcoin specifically? You're talking about Lightning Network?
Lightning Network, but also like, for example, for Odysee, like the Odysee is just a front end platform,
Right.
but the blockchain itself is a library.
Right.
And you don't, like, most people don't actually communicate with library. They actually go to the layer 2 solution.
Because you'd have to download and host the video content if you were going to download library. And it becomes a resource intensive proposition that most people are not willing to, they're not willing to do it.
And you can do that with Bitcoin too. And I'd say that it's even easier with Bitcoin because
I would say it is easier.
You have like, because you have multiple options on Bitcoin. You can run your node. You don't have to, but you can. If you don't want to run your node, you can still more or less anonymously send Bitcoin transactions in a more or less secure way. And you just have to trust a remote node, and that node could be easily logging your transactions, but it doesn't even matter because there is chain analysis. So because of transparency, but the layer 2 solutions, they are just companies building front end platforms so that they can communicate with the blockchain. In these front end platforms, they have the power to censor or remove participants from it.
Yeah, I feel like I was kind of comparing it to the earlier days of the internet and to where we are now. And regulation and companies are always there to mess up a good thing. Now, I still have hope for blockchain technology and specifically Bitcoin. Layer 2 technology I completely understand what you're saying. And I don't totally disagree, but I do disagree to a point because I think there's a lot of power in the ability, I will say, to manage those transactions if you decide to do that yourself. But it kind of goes back to the internet and everyone moving to like, oh, it's in the cloud. Well, it's someone else's server. So if you host your own, and I've mentioned Nextcloud ad nauseum, many times, in self-hosting, run a server in your basement, run a server at your house. And I think that, if you come at it from that approach, if you run a Lightning node and you open up channels, it's kind of like creating stability within the network, number one. And number two, it enhances the decentralization because not only can I run a Lightning node, I can also run a BTC Pay server. So I can sell products and I can issue the invoice for my own server and you can pay it directly to me. I'm processing the transaction. It's done in Lightning. And the funds are a little bit different, right? Because the way Lightning works is, for those that don't understand, Lightning Network is a layer on top of Bitcoin. So in a normal transaction, where if you want to send somebody Bitcoin on-chain, it can take a while. It can be kind of expensive. The fees can be kind of high. If you want it to be sent really quickly, you might have to pay 2, 3, 4, 5, byte sats per byte, which means you're spending more to transfer the funds quickly, and it could still take a while. Layer 2 with Lightning, there's liquidity that exists within the network already. So if I'm going to send the hated one, 0.1 BTC, and I'm using Lightning to do it, he's not actually receiving the BTC I'm sending from my wallet. He's receiving someone else's out of a liquidity pool, and mine goes into the liquidity pool. Kind of think of it like Western Union back in the old days, wire money. I think that has a lot of potential, but it does require mass adoption to scale. I think the last time I looked at the Lightning Network, which was, as far as the nodes and channels, was a few months ago, and it was somewhere around 80,000. We need like 10x that number. We need like 100x that number for way more than that probably for transactional scalability. And I'm really excited about developments of that, like where we've come just in this short time frame from 2008 2009. But I there are a lot of hangups, and there's a lot of protocol changes that happen. And when those protocol changes happen, sometimes you have to change out not your hardware, but sometimes you have to change how the software is running. It's an evolving, growing, living, breathing thing. And is it fully mature to replace something like Swift? No, but could it? I kind of look at it as like energy solutions. Like, you can't solve all of the world's energy problems with just wind or just solar. I think it takes a lot of different ideas and testing and experimenting and implementation on smaller scales to see how they work in small cities and scale them out before you could just blanket say, we need everybody to be off fossil fuels in the next 50 years, and we're going to just use wind and solar. It's like, I don't especially when you look at the growth rate of the population and the energy demand because of computing power. Now, as far as the mining and the proof of work, okay, I mean, it's not efficient. It's definitely not efficient from a power consumption standpoint, but it does provide confidence in that you don't have to trust a bank or an institution or a government for the verification and the validation of the transactions. It's done by a massive supercomputer between people running Bitcoin nodes and people running Bitcoin miners. And so, what other types of solutions that are not going to be centralized could you have that provide the same level of integrity? Now, you would argue that those have been centralized down to a handful of large mining pools, and I don't disagree. I'm not saying that it's the right solution, but it's at least a solution that's proven itself to work, at least on some level, better than just putting our full faith in the financial institutions that have basically run amok on our entire monetary policy and our debt and the value of the stability of the currency, the respective currency for whichever country that you're living in. We've seen time and time again when absolute power corrupts absolutely, and I see that's what's happening here. So in order to avoid that pitfall, you have to have something that's verifiable, that's open, and it's peer-to-peer, that where you don't have to trust a person or an organization or a bank. Is it the perfect solution? Absolutely not. I just feel like of all the things that we have going for us, it's pretty damn good. And I'm excited to see where it goes from here. Just like the early days of the internet, from people starting out on dial-up and putting in ADTD commands in a DOS window to connect to a BBS, to where we're now like fully connected all the time and you can stream content and all this other cool stuff. The downside, though, is that where we got where we are now, the trade-off was that a lot of that became very centralized, and I have a fear that will happen with crypto. I think that when we're talking about the Fed's just looking at this going like, cool, we can just we just issue our own central bank digital currency, and now we can actually track and see everything that we want to see. We can force people into using it, so it's almost kind of like we might have created our own demise in some respects, because cash will go away at some point. It's already a lot of, because of the pandemic, a lot of retail locations and restaurants don't even accept cash for their services, and they still don't, and they want digital payments. And I think that's going to become more like the norm and not like unusual. And the government surely is going to want to have a replacement that's beneficial for them to track, for tax purposes, for criminal purposes, whatever. They're gonna have a thousand reasons why, but it's not going to be good. It's not going to be good for the collective. It's not going to be good for the individual. It may be convenient, but it's not going to be good. So that's why I am such a crypto advocate, because what is the alternative? This dystopian monetary policy by non-elected officials, for one. They have the interest of the banks. These are their board members and chairmen of banks that sit on the board of these central banks. And they're in it for money. They're in it for the profit.
Well, you can say that about Bitcoin as well, because none of the participants in Bitcoin are elected. They are not even known in many cases, and many blockchain projects, they're completely anonymous. That's in the case of the Bitcoin developer himself, Satoshi Nakamoto, or themselves. And also,
but there's transparency, at least, where we don't have that transparency. Well, in the source code. There's transparency in how it works, and collaboration on development, just like the Linux kernel or anything else. Whereas, what kind of transparency do we have in our monetary policy? You talk about auditing the Fed. I don't think that will ever happen. I don't think you're ever going to.
The repo market is completely public. That's the repurchase agreement market, where the Federal Reserve basically pushes the decimal point further and further to increase the liquidity of the big banks.
Sure, but you're talking about secured versus unsecured debt. It has devalued the very asset that everyone relies on, to the point where it's not even worth buying bonds anymore. And foreign entities will not buy bonds because of the wild, unfettered access to basically make decisions unilaterally, purely based on economic speculation, which most of the time is never correct.
I mean, right now it's not worth it to buy bonds, but it wasn't always the case. It was the case that bonds made sense. And also, with Bitcoin, the actors that are in the Bitcoin network are self-centered themselves. Like miners, they care exactly zero about the usability of the network, and they have proven that time and time again, when they stopped plenty of suggestions to the Bitcoin protocol that it would have improved the user experience and made it easier for people to make fast and cheaper transactions. But miners refused that because they wanted more expensive transactions, because they make more Bitcoin. You have exchanges that are also just unelected, undemocratic, completely non-transparent institutions that require your personal information to tie that to your address. They oftentimes withhold your funds without any reason. There is no guarantee. There is no deposit guarantee at all. With banks, you have guarantee. I think in the United States, it's $200,000. You have government guarantee of your deposit. You don't have that with Bitcoin. You don't have that with cryptocurrency exchanges. Also, these exchanges are issuing their own tokens, like in the case of Binance, but also some others, Coinbase.
Yeah,
I don't know if Coinbase is their own.
Governments, but I mean, governments, especially when speaking of governments, talking about the United States government. You're talking about transparency. It's like, do you want to deal with a few egos here and there and that kind of thing, or do you want to deal with policymakers who get to determine intergovernmental funding for future projects that isn't even on that ticker yet? So it's kind of like spending generations of futures away before anyone actually gets to have a choice in the matter. So versus, and Bitcoin is an imperfect system. I'm not saying that it's the answer, it's the solution. But it's at least moving in the right direction that's not under the control or authority of people that get to determine what happens 20 years from now, which is exactly what you get with U.S. national debt. We can look at the debt clock. We can look at the transparency of debt held by the public. But what about all the legislation that's being proposed and voted on, which includes, unfunded, it could be Social Security or Medicare promises for, things down the road that is basically retroactively going to screw everybody. We're already screwed. I mean, it's just like just layering in at this point. Like how much more? So you're talking about total liabilities. I think that there's things that you're looking at that maybe don't include all pensions and retirements and publicly held debt, unfunded social programs. I mean, you're talking, over $100 trillion. Not just what you see on the debt clock at, for the public national debt. I'm talking about the whole entire future of money and monetary policy. It's ass backwards to look at something that has an inflation rate that it does so rapidly. And a lot of this goes beyond, right? I mean, arguably Bitcoin is not used for a petrodollar. It's not used as a reserve currency. So we're not really comparing apples to apples here. But if we're looking at something that clearly is wildly just rampant and is going to fail, it will fail at some point. It just can't go on forever. Meaning our current monetary policy and the USD is a world reserve currency compared to something that at least is deflationary to the point where it's like, I know you make the case for, well, if you lose your keys, you're fucked and the money's gone. It's like, yeah, that's true. But if I have a suitcase full of money and it goes into the ocean, you could say it's gone, but really it's not. Or if the bank collapses, it's gone, but it's really not because it's FDIC insured. But it's like it still costs somebody something somewhere. And that will always fall back on the taxpayer. If a bank fails, it will recover only because they will allow it to be consumed by other banks. Or, the money's insured, but it's insured by what? The federal government, right? What exactly is that? It's this endless printing and keep spending and no reinvestment into the things that really matter. I don't know. I know we're kind of edging more into like the policy of it versus Bitcoin, which definitely has its problems, but it has a consensus. It has rules. It has a clear defined mission. It has a clear defined supply. And yes, it does have a lot of, downfalls. But what else do we really have that could kind of give? And the other thing too is, I'm talking about the US dollar, which is very, I won't say it's only matters to the United States because it matters all over the globe as a world reserve, but Bitcoin does have global reach in a way that doesn't require permission from the normal institutions that get to determine whether or not something is potentially fraud, a suspicious activity, all these things. You send it, it goes. No one can stop it. And so at its core, fundamentally, I always lean towards the anarchist, kind of way of doing things because it gives power back to the individual. And though, yes, mining pools and, I do get it. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think you have way too much faith in the US dollar. Because
I don't have faith in the US dollar at all.
Okay. Because I'm looking at this going, you look at the public debt clock at 30 trillion and I'm looking at, the actual bottom line, which is probably closer to 150 trillion. So there's so much more liability on the balance sheet that's not represented in the debt clock is my point.
No, I don't have any faith in the US dollar at all. My problem is that I have no reason to have faith in Bitcoin either. And that's my issue. Like you were saying that Bitcoin is giving the power back to the individual, but I don't see that. I don't see how. Because individual users have no voting power on the Bitcoin protocol. The Bitcoin protocol is decided by the Bitcoin core, which is a very small group of developers. And this group of developers have been infiltrated by plenty of pretty shady characters that nobody really knows who they are, what they do. Like it's like worse than even the European Union, because like this is a bunch of people that came out of like nowhere. They were not known by anyone, and now they are making like monetary decisions inside a code. Also, like miners are just forming this consensus, but miners is really just now a handful of companies that are controlling the almost 100% of the hash rate of the network. So the general user of Bitcoin has like no decision making power in Bitcoin. They can only make decisions about their own coins, but you can do that with your own dollar. So if you take like Ethereum and what's his name, Vitalik Buterin,
Buterin.
yeah, that
Buterin.
Buterin, something like that. Yeah, so he decided to change Ethereum's protocol from inflationary to deflationary, thinking that, well, this is going to increase the value of Ethereum. So now Ethereum is being burned on like every, I don't know which transaction, but like, I mean, what are you doing exactly? Because like, okay, so you can raise a lot of criticism towards the monetary policy of any given currency in any given region, against the euro, against the yuan or won or whatever. But it is easier for you as a citizen of your country to influence the monetary policy of your central bank than it is to influence the policy of Bitcoin, because that has been decided by people who have absolutely zero knowledge in economics. These people are just coders, they're programmers, they are designers. They have no idea what economics even is. They have no interest in like financial stability of the country. And Bitcoin is far from stable. It's unstable. It's completely off the charts, unlike anything we've ever seen before. I've actually made I think 2 videos on Fed, and I don't like the Fed. I don't like how it works. I think that the US dollar should be controlled by the US Treasury, because the Treasury is actually much more controlled by the democratic process, whereas the Fed is not really. And I don't think that I think the main problem is that the Fed can issue the US dollars. It used to be the case that it was only in the realm of the US Treasury. And a lot of people are actually critical of that decision, and we can actually have a debate about that. And okay, well, so let's vote in the politicians that will change that law, that will change that mandate, that rule. You cannot have that in Bitcoin. You don't have that there. You have no say. You're saying about how Bitcoin. You're talking about how Bitcoin is giving the individual the power, but you don't have any power. Like, you can run your node, you can contribute to the network, of course, you can help make it decentralized, but you have no decision, because there are no decisions being made. Like, this is just whatever the Bitcoin core wants to do, they are gonna do it. Then miners are gonna basically say, well, we're gonna support it or not with our hash rate, and that's it. Like, that's done. And this is not me saying anything about the face value of the US dollar or any other fiat currency. It's just that I don't see Bitcoin as a solution to the problems that we are facing. What I see as a solution to our problems is, well, short of revolution, at least better politics, right? So, like, if people want to have this change, maybe Occupy Wall Street would be a good idea to do it again, but this time in the form of a general strike.
But those elected officials are directly responsible for the outcome of our current monetary policy. I mean, the Glass-Steagall Act, right, which is the Banking Act, was in place to prevent banks and from being investment banks and savings and loans, and that was, I think, kind of like the beginning of the end for a lot of the financial crises that we've seen in the last 50 years. In the 1980s, again in the mid 2000s, creating products, it's just so irresponsible, anything to make money at any and all costs. And I guess it's like, for the way I look at it is like the balance of like, I don't really say like the two evils or anything, but it's like, I don't think there's a perfect system that you could create at scale that meets the requirements, but yet also has privacy shields built into it. You know, arguably cash is still probably the most private way of conducting any kind of financial transaction. And I'm not talking about wiring funds. I'm just talking, I put cash in your hand and you give me the widget. And I feel like, you know, Bitcoin is king because it was first to market, that actually was adopted at scale. It wasn't the first, you know, digital cash, but it was the first that was adopted at scale, and probably will run its course. Will it be the long-standing? I don't know. Maybe it will be the digital version of gold at some point, and maybe there's other things that will take its place. I actually was a huge fan of Decred and still am. I really liked the consensus, the way that it worked was that, you know, you would actually stake by purchasing tickets, and those tickets actually gave you voting authority as an individual user, not a developer, about changes to the blockchain. And I really liked that process. I liked participating in the process. You still had staking pools and some things because you have to have some organization somewhere, you know, but maybe there's a way. And I think that this is just the beginning of the evolution of it, but I want to see it succeed and get enough like adoption to get to whatever that next stage is. I don't want to sit here and tell you that I 100% believe that Bitcoin is going to be the cryptocurrency that's really going to create that digital revolution or monetary revolution, but it sure is creating enough waves, and it's enlightening people to understand the deficiencies within current monetary policy with centralized banks. And it's just like, if you were to, you know, the world has doubled in population in my lifetime, more than doubled, and you know, I start looking at like, how does life look in not just 20 years, but just 10 years from now? Look where we've come in 10 years. And with the rapid growth of technology and innovation and creativity and more people to contribute, I think that there's hope for a peer-to-peer, trustless digital, you know, transfer of value that could work in a utopian type, you know, environment. How? I don't know. I really don't. Again, these things become really complicated really quickly, but I look at it as like a proof of example that these things can be achieved. They're not perfect, but it was basically developed as a protest to the Occupy, you know, movement, to not the movement, but the reason why Occupy came about, to the failed banking system. I believe it was a protest to that. And whoever they or she or he is, Satoshi Nakamoto, I think it was just like an idea that basically was better than what they were experiencing at the time. That if this could work, it would at least be better than this crisis we had gotten ourselves into. But no matter what it is that kind of, you know, rises to the top, is ever going to be, you know, an absolute perfect sound solution. It almost can't, just by its own nature of it being a system designed to transfer value from one destination to the other. It's cool though. It's cool to be a part of it. It's cool to see it, even with its flaws. And I don't think anyone should be putting all their eggs in any one particular basket. I think that there's just as much value in trying to purchase land and learn how to grow food and learn how to, you know, have animals like, you know, chickens, and, you know, anywhere that you can kind of take back any sustainability for yourself. And those are kind of very like privileged things to say, because there are people in the world who don't have anything or very little, but they might have a phone, and to be able to receive value from a family member across the globe that would enable them to, have some purchasing power without asking anyone for permission in between is a very powerful thing, regardless of the miners, regardless of the, developers and the decision making. Just the pure fact that you can actually transact permissionless is quite an amazing feat. But it'd be insane for me to say like what I think, what it holds for the future, its role in the future. And I certainly don't believe that blockchain is the answer for everything. I don't think so. But I do think it is it is like just as amazing as the internet itself in a lot of ways. It's a pretty beautiful system, but far from perfect. I mean, you could say BitTorrent is, maybe a solution, but you still need central locations for tracking who has what and where to go for something. I always feel like in any system, there's got to be someone that is aware, not someone, but a system that is aware of how to be most efficient with what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that's the biggest hang up, is that creates a central point of power. We probably need to have another person on that is more in tune with the inner workings of the decision making and how decisions get made and where those challenges lie ahead, because it's going to be pretty specialized,
Yeah. That's definitely a good idea. I think we should invite someone maybe to have a discussion with. But the thing is that, I think the solution is not in technology. I think that if we disagree with the current monetary policy and the system is not reflecting our views of what it should be, then we should go to the streets. We should protest, we should strike, we should boycott, and we should stop any sort of systematic function that enables this monetary policy to be in place, and make sure that our demands are being listened to before the system can work again. So basically,
yeah,
general strike.
You're talking about a full revolution,
yeah?
and I think that that's entirely possible. I think it's actually highly probable at some point to see, especially in our lifetime, to see some crazy stuff go down in the future, because that's exactly what it's going to take, is a revolt, is what really, not like violence, but I just mean like, it may resort to violence, but, is a full blown revolt against the system. And and in a lot of ways, the very subject matter that you and I talk about is little tiny revolutions against big tech, against government, against censorship. And I think that one of the other things that we're missing as well is that, if anything, Bitcoin has demonstrated is power and breaking up the centralization of power, whether it's
But can you explain how? Because I don't see that.
So yeah, it existed in a lot of forms before, but it wasn't as widely implemented. I'm talking about like federated, decentralized, solutions.
But how did Bitcoin decentralized anything?
Well, if you go back to before ASICs and mining pools really took over, you go back to the early days when you really could mint off of a laptop and a CPU running in your tower computer and doing things like it really was a revolution, because it gave the power to anyone who put the time and effort into understanding how to set up a miner. And I think that mindset has carried through to today on a much bigger scale. Decentralization is not new. It's existed before, BBSs and website servers and everything. But now people are talking about setting up, and actually setting up their own Matrix servers and Mastodon servers and BTC Pay. It's like doing things where they're taking back ownership and responsibility for how they communicate, how they compute, how they transact with each other, doing commerce. I mean, look at the darknet markets for one. They existed. The whole concept came out of because cryptocurrency was real. Being able to transact on a hidden service and transfer value for a widget, a product. I don't know if some people will say, yeah, drugs. It's like, yeah, okay, fine, drugs. We'll call it's like it's that whole revolt against traditional commerce platforms and censorship. It's instilled a movement ideal in people, myself included, that spans beyond just Bitcoin itself. It's if you were to put Bitcoin in a box and start connecting those to other boxes that have kind of came out of this revolt to the way traditional monetary policy has been conducted. It's fascinating. Like I don't try to go like I'm looking at it more like a higher level, and it's really kind of, I think, empowered people to wake up and say like, wow, yeah, you leave government in control of things before, after a certain point, it's not a sustainable model. So what are things that we can do? I can run a darknet market. I could sell things, and I could have this. We could use this digital cash, so to speak. Whether it's Monero or Bitcoin, it doesn't really matter. It's just the whole fact that you're able to do these things that you could never do before its existence, without literally putting cash in an envelope and hoping it makes it through the mail.
I mean, if you are talking about like the there's a podcast called Crypto Critics Corner, and they call Bitcoin as the resilient payment method of the last resort. Then yeah, maybe that's the only utility of Bitcoin. That's
well, anything
feasible.
A lot of things that start off like really fringe eventually find themselves in the mainstream, right? When we were talking about the early pioneers and hackers of the internet, and we mean hackers who actually were talking about, reverse engineering and building things and doing things a different way. I kind of just look at this as a second wave of that, or maybe a third wave. But you have to go through these processes and iterations to finally get somewhere that actually is beneficial for the individual and the collective. But it's not pretty, and it's not perfect, and it has flaws. But I wouldn't discount blockchain, and I wouldn't discount Bitcoin just because of its current state, without considering its origins, just like we did with the internet and where the internet exists today. You know what I'm saying? I guess I'm kind of getting a little more philosophical, from this perspective, because it's just amazing that it's gotten as far as it has, and it has been as successful as it has been, even amidst its challenges and its flaws and its inconsistencies. The fact that it's still surviving, and it's such a high coveted asset, to the tune of $40,000 a coin, it demonstrates that the desire is there to break away from the norm.
No, it's the price doesn't demonstrate anything. It's just a number. It doesn't say how many people are actually using the coin for anything tangible. Like I think.
Well, you're talking.
I think the high.
I mean, when you say the price is nothing, it's like it is something. It's a current current demand value, right? So
well, yeah, but the demand value is not telling you how the Bitcoin is actually used. What you want to be looking at is
I mean, you can look
how
at the
many.
mempool. You can look at what are you talking about? Like you don't know what's being used for transactions versus what's being used for market trading. Is that kind of what you mean? Like deciphering like what percentage?
What I'm saying is that the price shouldn't matter at all ever. It shouldn't be the goal. It should be nothing, because eventually, if you want to get to a system where Bitcoin is mainstream, then one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. So
sure,
the price says nothing about the utility of Bitcoin. It just means that how much money.
But name one asset or commodity on the planet that's only worth its thing. Everything has a value to current fiat or its current exchange of value. You have to peg it to something, right? I'm not saying you're wrong or I disagree. I'm just saying, like, it's worth 5 Ferraris. It's worth 2 ounces of gold. Like, what is a reasonable exchange value from a barter perspective? I mean, at some point there's got to be a baseline for, and I know what you're saying. Well, if a Bitcoin is just worth a Bitcoin, but then it's like, okay, I get it, but in order for it to scale and onboard, there has to be a way to acquire it if you're not mining it. So what are you going to exchange for it?
No, that's actually a different aspect. But my point is that the highlight of Bitcoin usage was probably the Silk Road, and it went downhill from them because now Bitcoin is not really used for anything other than speculation, and you have this price manipulation that's happening completely in the background. Like we can blame all these banks for making shady deals with our mortgages and insurance loans and whatever else that they're bundling together and then selling in derivatives. But you have that in Bitcoin. It's even worse because it's happening between exchanges, and it's like with offshore companies, with like anonymous LLCs. It's like multiple layers. Like nobody knows what's going on, and they're all doing it so that they can exchange Tether or any other stablecoin, so that they can manipulate the price, so that they can short Bitcoin, so that they can buy Bitcoin later. So that, like it's the price is nothing. It's like it has no real meaning to the message of Bitcoin, if there is even any, because I think that at the moment the only thing that matters is the price of Bitcoin, because that's how they can speculate and make more money off of it. But like would you honestly buy a house with Bitcoin? Like I remember that not too long ago, that Ethereum guy had to change his wallet for some reason, whatever. So he needed to transfer 33,000 Ethereums or whatever their Ethereum ethers, I guess. I don't know. Yep. And he described this experience as something extremely tedious. Like this was so horrible. It was so like nerve wrenching because he needed to make sure like 6 times and had some multiple trusted people to verify the correctness of the address, that he doesn't accidentally send his Ethereum to an invalid address and lose it permanently. So like would you even buy a house with Bitcoin if there is a chance that you could completely lose?
The same thing happens with a mortgage. I mean, when you buy a house and you get your information from a title company for the earnest money, and then for the down payment wire, I mean, you still kind of go through the same process. They make sure like, hey, 100% verify this email address, verify everything. I mean, because you could end up wiring money to an account that's not the correct one. I mean, is that more recoverable? Possibly, but it kind of depends. I'm not saying that the inherent risk is bad in those things. It's just the way that it is. That's what you need to have in order for it to work. If you set up 2-factor authentication on a hardware device and you lose the hardware devices, I mean, you're kind of in the same boat, right? Or if you forget the password to an encrypted vault with all your personal files in there, you're kind of fucked. It's like there's always risk anytime you increase the level of obfuscation or privacy or security or whatever you want to call it. It's true. But I don't really know how that would make it not usable. I guess in order to have tools and simplicity, a lot of these companies have taken advantage of that to come in and create all these apps and exchanges. And I mean, hell, you can buy, I don't think there's a single app that doesn't try to sell you cryptocurrency in the United States. I think Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, they all sell Bitcoin, all of them. They try to make it as easy as possible to provide that gateway.
But that's not how you should acquire Bitcoin if that permissionless system is what you care about. Because if you get them from these,
I agree. And that's what I was saying. That's what I was trying to say. Where we're at now to where we started from and everything is like, it's very different. And that's what I'm saying. I don't really think that this is the answer, right? But I think that the answer lies within a lot of these experiments, is kind of like how I refer to it. Whether it's whether it's the early days in development of the internet, and increased bandwidth, and Bitcoin, like look at you talk about Silk Road. It's kind of like, and maybe that was a turning point. What was that, 2011 or 12 or something?
Yeah.
Or maybe a little bit later than that. It might have been like 2015
Yeah.
even. It's like, it's a proof. If you look at it as like a science experiment, like, okay, this shit actually works. Like, this is pretty fascinating. And it's like, I think those are the most exciting times, and are in these like little windows from its infancy to like, wow, it's actually doing some really cool stuff, to now here we are. Oh, I can buy it from AOL, right? I can buy, and I say AOL as a tongue in cheek to, the ISP days and stuff like that. It's like, oh, now, it's not really cool anymore. It's not really like, at its core, it's not really accomplishing the same thing what it was sent out to do. And so it's kind of been bastardized to a degree. Probably not the right term to use, apologize, but I'm just saying, like, it's been kind of manipulated, it's been extorted, or it's used in ways to, not extorted, it's been used in ways to sensationalize its onboarding to make transaction fees for the exchanges, right? And the speculation and the excitement and all this stuff. I think that is the problem, is that big disconnect between the general populace that doesn't understand what the hell Bitcoin is. They just know it keeps going up in value, and I want to try to buy some so I can, make some money, versus people who actually care about the real ethos. Just kind of like you and I, we talk about, well, we really want people to like love technology and use it in a way that benefits them, but it's kind of tricky, and it's not the sexy part, right? It's kind of unsexy. So I think, are we past the event horizon with Bitcoin, and will it ever be able to come back? Possibly, but maybe something else, or something else will evolve from that does fit more within a democratic solution that we just doesn't even exist yet, or that we haven't seen come about yet. So I guess I'm excited for, what I've seen so far, what I've been able to be a part of and experience so far. And I've experienced a lot. I mean, I've had miners. I'm definitely a trader. Not so much now, but I did a lot of trading, especially around 2016, 17, 18, when things were really popping before the first big dump, from 20K down to 3 or 4 grand through 2018 into 2019. Because it's a wild ride. It's addicting. It's like adrenaline rush. And you've got, GPUs running, and you're, I was mining all sorts of altcoins. I was mining a lot of Monero and Ethereum at the time. It's fun to be a part of that. Just like running a BBS server back in the late 90s. It's like, it's kind of this, I don't know. So I think also maybe I'm not the best, because I get really nostalgic about these types of things. I get really into the idea that you can be part of something that's counterculture to mainstream, and that when mainstream doesn't understand it and they look at it and you're like, it's like some little kids, internet money, like Pokemons or something. I don't know what Bitcoin is. You go back to the 90s, and I think is the Today Show. They're like, what is this email? They didn't even know what an email address was, or the @ symbol. They're, it's kind of a meme now, but it's like, I feel like now it's matured enough to the point where it's basically being exploited and used for, other gain that isn't part of its original focus, for sure. And a lot of people will argue, well, if you didn't have corporate interests or onboarding ways, it would have never got as big as it has. Maybe that's true too. And maybe it'd still be this kind of like dark net, kind of a phenomenon that only is used for those purposes. But I get it. And I don't disagree with where your viewpoint is. I think I'm more I'm more fluid with it. I don't look at it as a polished final product that's going to solve all these problems, but it has definitely been disruptive, and it's not going anywhere. Like blockchain and digital money, like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube at this point. There's always going to be something now. Always. Will it be a Monero or something else? You know, you go on the dark net, they all want Monero. I mean, they'll take Bitcoin, but Monero is like the coin of choice. You know, Zcash, Monero, right? The most privacy kind of respecting cryptocurrencies out there. Maybe that's the one that wins, or something like it. And Bitcoin kind of chills in the background, and it's just this grandfather gold coin that you hold on. I don't know. You know, I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist. I mean, I'm definitely probably more leaning towards Bitcoin than anything else because it's the OG. But I'm also not completely naive to believe that like there's usually something that will do something better or more efficient or more, you know, more democratically. I like I said, I mentioned Decred earlier. That was a great ethos for a crypto, you know, for something like this, because it did truly give each individual, just like stocks. You know, you hold stocks, you get positions, right? So however many shares you have, you get voting positions within that company. That, you know, they have their annual meeting and you get to vote a certain way. There's usually a different set of ways you can vote for something if you're more like leaning towards green, or you're more profitable, or you're more about expansion, or whatever. And I really liked that about Decred, and it's kind of a bummer that it's kind of faded off. I was really hopeful that would actually be more adopted than it was. But yeah, I don't know if I'm basically just repeating myself at this point. Probably am.
Yeah, I think that the example of Odysee would be pretty good to explain this, because so many people, I mean, I cannot even count how many people have told me to go to Odysee and just use the library protocol, upload my videos there, and all of my problems that I have with YouTube will be gone.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so let's think about it thoroughly. So Odysee is not a blockchain. Odysee is just a website. It's just a front-end social media platform just like any other. They have a legal policy, they have a privacy policy, they have terms of service, they have community guidelines. They will remove your content, they will curate your content, they will, they have an algorithm, they have a feed, just like any other social media platform. And their biggest selling point is that they're serving this off of the library blockchain. So I would upload my videos to the library blockchain, and then nothing would happen, because what needs to happen is that there needs to be a platform that delivers that curates that content to my audience. So now I'm actually losing control of my audience completely, because I am surrendering that to the whatever platforms that are built on top of the library blockchain to curate my content. So if Odysee decides to remove my content, censor it, filter it, destroy my channel, there are also copyright issues with Odysee as well. So they are basically removing that content from Odysee. The content stays on the library blockchain, but it is not being delivered to the audience. But that's all that matters. Like if you cannot deliver the content to the audience, then it doesn't matter if it's in the blockchain. Like it literally doesn't matter. Right. And this is the same problem with all the other blockchain solutions that are out there, including Bitcoin and everything else. The blockchain itself on its own is so inefficient that it's virtually unusable. So you need to have these layer 2 solutions that are again reintroducing the centralization of the old platforms. So I don't really see the point whatsoever in just trusting and moving into these blockchain solutions, because they are not solving the problem. They are just not doing it. And they are not doing it today, and I don't see how they're going to be doing that in the future. I just don't see blockchain as this solution. I thought it would be, but if you think about it, if you're intellectually honest about it, and you realize that the blockchain on its own is pretty heavy. It's just too heavy for its own good, and it cannot be used for anything practical. You need to have layer 2 solutions. Then what's even the point of
there's a lot of applications for blockchain that I think could be very disruptive and highly more efficient. I mean, I'll give you an example. I don't know if you've ever had to deal with land title tracking land titles.
Mm,
I mean, I think of things
no.
like that where, well, if it's on the blockchain, it'd be super easy to find. It'd be highly
If it
efficient.
was, but is it on the
No,
blockchain?
no, it's not.
Okay, so why not?
Well, you're going to put a lot of people out of work if you do that.
So that's good.
Well, unless you're one of those people that gets put out of work.
Yeah, but those people are not making the economic decisions. So that's like with automation. So if we're going to
Sure,
automate things because it's better, then we're going to do it.
sure.
No one cares about workers.
um, Going to the Odysee thing, I think one of my initial thoughts about not, okay, people say, yeah, go on, put it on Odysee, put it on Rumble. It's like, well, that's not where the people that need to hear the message are. That's where people who have already kind of woken up to these alternative solutions and different things, where they eventually might go. But I really think that people put too much hope into a lot of things as a replacement, when you have the best chance to reach a wider audience that is not informed on the mainstream platforms. It's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like, not really double-edged sword, but it's, I don't know. I go back and forth with that. So what if your objective is to try to meet as many people and wherever they are in their journey, right, and discovering new information and doing research, they never even heard of Odysee, and if they have, it's because they're watching or listening to someone who's already on that platform, but then also redirecting them to say, and you should also try this, just like you do now. Hey, you should also move over to Signal, move over to Session, move over to Matrix or Kutch or Briar, move over. They don't know about that until someone tells them. It'd be like going on Briar and be like, okay, I'm here. Where's everybody at? It's, you kind of have to play in both sandboxes. And the idea is to get as many people to the other sandbox as possible. What you're saying is, though, that you just don't think that the sandbox is worth really going to as far as blockchain goes, because it's wildly inefficient.
Because it's not a solution. Because like people are saying, well, go to the library because it will not censor your content. But like there are so many ways that you can censor the library itself, even the blockchain itself. Like, unless you're hosting it on a hidden onion service, which I'm not even sure that's possible. On Bitcoin, you can actually host your node on
Right.
a hidden
I
onion
do.
service,
Yeah,
which is actually,
yeah, that's where mine are running. Yeah, they're running on.
yeah.
Yeah,
So that's actually the most resilient way, even though they could technically fuck up your onion service if they find out your address, which you can leak it accidentally. That can happen.
Sure, that can happen.
Yeah. But if you're on the clear net, then they can just, ISPs can just go out and just not serve your server. So then it's over. Like your blockchain is not serving, like, or your node is not serving the blockchain. And if you do this on enough nodes, then it's over. Then you can censor the curators, the platforms, the layer 2 solutions. You can completely have a government mandate. You can have ISPs do that to them as well.
I think at this point you're at a revolt, crossroad. I think that if that's where things go, and they very well could go that direction. It's like, I try to be hopeful in a very unhopeful, it's like being behind the wheel with no brakes, and you're about to hit it downhill, and you're like, well, hopefully we'll make it. We could maybe skid off into the grass and survive. I mean, but you're right. I mean, you are right about that. It wouldn't happen overnight. These are things that would happen over a period of time, and hopefully that people would stand up and resist. And I think that innovators would find ways to go back kind of like more underground and create new methods and ways to operate outside that purview of ClearNet, connections. But, I think people also are tired of having to feel like, that's your only option. That to live in a world like that is really depressing, where that's happening.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like the centralization of the internet is horrible. Like, that's I don't know. Like, we are so used to the central news feed. Like, you log into your Facebook account or whatever, and you are automatically served content. Like, or TikTok is even worse. You don't even have to like have any like contacts, whatever. Like
Right.
immediately you log into TikTok and you're being served content constantly,
Right. Right.
and like and yeah, but that's like a multi-billion-dollar business. It's like a unicorn or whatever it's called. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I hate everything that's currently in our system. So like nobody can call me like a supporter
Right.
of the big tech
A
or whatever.
shill
Like
for any particular thing because you just
yeah.
hate everything. And that's that's okay. I mean that's where you're at, and that's you bring up a lot of, because you have that position, you do bring up a lot of very good points, and it does force some critical thinking to be utilized and not get caught up in the not just be caught up in the hysteria and the sensationalism of how awesome crypto is, or how awesome decentralization is, and all that. It does also take a lot of work and effort to get where you want to go, and I think that you need a certain collective of people that are willing to put aside monetary gain to work towards something that's truly beneficial for their fellow person. That's kind of asking a lot in a society that's so consumerist mindset, filled with consumerism and got to have this and got to have that and the latest, and I need this, and it's like being on a treadmill. You're working your ass off, but you're not going anywhere further. And I don't really have a good answer for all of that. I just I kind of look at things as they come, and try to take the good with the bad. And it's not perfect, and it may die. It may be something else later. It's what we've got now, and it's very different, and there's a lot of benefits to it. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, because of its mainstream acceptance and all this, corruption, it could also be its demise, and maybe that's part of the plan. I don't know. If there was a, group of oligarchs or the Illuminati or whatever, maybe that's part of the plan. I don't know. Give these bunch of peons some false hope for something, and then we'll pull the rug out from underneath of them. You have to remember, we don't know who created it. We don't know who is the author of the white paper, and maybe it's one huge massive experiment.
yeah, that's my problem, that we have to like surrender our economic or monetary sovereignty to a white paper. Like that's the opposite of where we should be going. Like I don't think that Bitcoin is a focused project. It's trying to be too many things at once. And I think that if you're saying you're talking a lot about a permissionless payment system, and if that's what we want to do, let's do that.
Right.
You don't have to have your own cryptocurrency or like your own token necessarily for that. If you want to have a private system, let's build that. You don't need to build a blockchain for that. You don't need to build a whole other monetary system for that. If you want to have these specific features and functions, you can have that. We can start working towards that, and I think that will be even better, because now you would have different projects for maybe different features that you're looking for, right? So like, and you can work within the current model of the monetary system and try to find ways to fix the problems that you are mostly focused on. But Bitcoin, because it's trying to be, I'm not even sure if it's trying to be everything or it's trying to be nothing, because at the moment it's really doing nothing other than just being a very speculative asset that people are just gambling on. And I agree that we should have a permissionless system that anyone can use, and you don't have to go to a central authority to transact your funds or maybe receive a salary. That would be awesome. But I don't think that we need to have Bitcoin for that. And I don't think that Bitcoin is actually delivering that either, because it's making it incredibly hard and expensive to use it on this daily currency basis. So like nobody's going to be receiving Bitcoin, their salary in Bitcoin and buying groceries in Bitcoin. Nobody's going to buy bread with Bitcoin. Maybe you could do that with some layer 2 solutions, but then again, it's you're coming back to the centralization model. So let's build a decentralized payment system that is completely permissionless, but let's have that a payment system only, a payment processor only, and nothing more. I'm kind of like, I don't know, I don't see Bitcoin as this, and I think that you kind of agree with me here because you are not saying anything tangible that can be done. You're really just hopeful that in the future it will be a solution. But for me, I just don't have that hope for Bitcoin, and I don't know. I think a general strike would be a better solution, and if short of general strike, maybe just creating a payment processor that that is truly permissionless.
That's not going to happen. You're asking, I just don't. I think that there has to be a desire to use it beyond just the pure. I think that, it's not attractive. It's not that concept is attractive to people like you and I, because we have a pretty good understanding of like what you're saying. We have a good understanding of where we came from. We have a good understanding of where we are right now, this moment, our options. And you could build this permissionless system, but like how is it validated? How do you ensure that it's not replicated or counterfeited? There's so many problems to solve with a transfer of value that, though Bitcoin has definitely proven itself to be very inefficient, or definitely has its flaws. It is actually working, and I think that where you're coming from is not so much in that it works as far as a transfer of something, value, right? And you have issues with the value. I can understand that. But that, what then do you do with it to do anything in like real life, like at the grocery store or buying coffee? And I think that's where they're trying to go, there, as far as the proponents of cryptocurrency, to actually get people out of the mindset of, hey, or stop, you don't just hold on to it for the long-term value. It's like actually use it on a daily basis. And I think that because I use it on a fairly regular basis, I kind of have a different perspective about its value in truly being a payment. It can be a payment processing utility that I don't have to rely on PayPal for, or Stripe, or Authorize.net, or anything else. It's proven a really good experiment in that regard. If you're looking at it just kind of like, it works, and it works quickly. Layer 2 is the shit. I mean, it is fast as hell. And I disagree that it's centralized. I don't know how you call something centralized that relies on everyday people like myself running Lightning nodes. We need more people to do it to become more stable. There's not does it mean that they're not like centralized locations of Bitcoin nodes? Sure, but they've got to put up, they have to put in equity though for it to be feasible.
Yeah, but that's because it's a central point of failure. So like before Lightning, you would have miners who would be the only validators of transactions. So if you wanted to really, really censor somebody's transaction, you would have to go to the miners. But now you only have to go to the liquidity pool.
Right, but I'm just saying the liquidity pool, I don't see how that would be looked at as centralized.
It's not necessarily centralized. It's just a central point of failure. Like you can go there if you want to censor transactions.
How would you censor transactions in liquidity nodes?
Because you have to contribute some liquidity to the pool,
right,
to make sure that transactions are happening, because they are not actually peer-to-peer transactions anymore. So they are going to this pool, and
but they really are actually peer-to-peer. It's just that there's more peers involved in the process. If you want to send a Lightning payment to somebody, it requires a peer like me to have a node running with liquidity in the channel. And then it can go on to the next peer. It doesn't even get written to the chain till much later, which is why you can do it so cheaply, because you can wait and write those transactions later to on chain. So I actually look at it as like it's probably the most purest form of peer-to-peer for Bitcoin that we have today. You know, like, and I don't know how you would censor that, because I have no idea what's coming in. All I'm doing is handling the request and going, cool. All right, I'm sending 100,000 sats to this channel. You know, it's going to end up in its destination. It's kind of like Tor. Like, I mean, maybe that's not a great example, but I don't really care where it came from or where it's going. I'm just doing it in and out. So I don't know. In order to censor that, you would have to have control of my node. You know, as far as UTXO tracking or anything like that, like none of that's happening on my end. You know, and by the time it gets written to the chain, it's like too late anyway. The transaction's already transpired. You're not going to undo that. I don't know. I feel like Lightning is a huge step in the right direction for Bitcoin within the context of Bitcoin, in that it really does go peer-to-peer. You don't have to be a miner. There is no, you know, the mining pool isn't even involved in that transaction. It kind of like, it actually makes the mining pools like they can become like Switzerland. Like if there's, you know, how we were talking about like, you know, censoring certain, you know, UTXOs to not be mined. It's like this actually kind of like takes away that ability in a lot of ways, because now it's like, what are they going to do? Not process the block? Well, how, you know, it kind of makes them like, they don't even have to be involved in the process at all at this point, as far as determining what transactions get mined and which don't. I don't know. Like, again, we probably need to have someone like BTC Sessions or somebody who really knows the intricacies of layer 2 and what problems it's solving for a lot of the problems that you're talking about with Bitcoin in its totality, because I think it actually does provide a lot of peer-to-peer and decentralization within Bitcoin, because you're operating outside of the mining pools. You know, and it's incredibly fast and incredibly cheap. So
there is a good article or a couple of articles on Bitcoin censorship, and it did address the Lightning Network as well. I would have to look at it again, because that was a while ago.
Okay.
When
I'll have to research
when I
it.
looked at this.
I'll have to research it too. Maybe we can have another, you know, extension of that, because for me, like, you can transact Lightning over Tor, and like, it's freaking awesome. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like it adds new features that address a lot of those kind of like initial on-chain concerns and mining pool kind of consolidation concerns. And those are valid concerns. And it doesn't, you know, yes, miners still have to run. They still have to consume energy to maintain, you know, the ledger, or, you know, to mine blocks and append them to the ledger. But layer 2 seems to just, I don't know. For me, I look at it as going like, well, it's still not perfect, but like, that's what I'm saying. It's evolving into and trying to, I think, get somewhere where ultimately like you kind of want to be. But I need to do more research on that, and I need to have some more conversations before I can really say that that's truly, in fact, the final destination. You know?
Yeah, same here. Yeah, I'm not too well versed into this. I actually did plan to make a video on Bitcoin censorship. But I kind of lost interest in Bitcoin on the way, because
fair point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like halfway into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency.
Sure.
Like just kind of like looking at it from a distance, and because I used to be pretty enthusiastic about this technology, and I really thought for a moment that we can solve a lot of our problems today with just better technology. But now I'm seeing it, well, better technology might be necessary to solve many of our problems, but it's not enough. It's not, better technology alone would not solve the constraints and problems of bad monetary policy. And I think that what Bitcoin is doing is that it is stripping us of the ability to actually influence the monetary policy in any sort of democratic way. It is just going to be this is the thing, that a lot of these maxis are saying that code is law. This is such a terrible idea, that code is law. So basically, some developer in some shitty city, probably in California or somewhere, is going to is going to be writing code, and that code is now going to be law for people. Like, you're completely stripping away the concept of citizenship, of sovereignty, of like that power comes from the people. Like all these toxic elements that are present in the Bitcoin movement, I'm pretty afraid of those, and I don't want those to become the dominant feature of the future Bitcoin. I think it will be a dystopian. I don't think it will be utopia if we just have Bitcoin and nothing else. I think we would still have to balance Bitcoin with good counter regulation and maybe counter opposition. That's not even a word. Opposition from just, like people should still have the ability to strike, to protest, to just do anything to be able to disrupt the system. And I fear that Bitcoin is taking away the power from the people, and it's accumulating all of that power within itself, within the blockchain. And people who are in control of the blockchain gets to control all of the economy that's based on the blockchain itself. So that would be just the miners, or Lightning node operators. It wouldn't be the regular people. I mean, there are so many problems with the current monetary systems, and like all political systems that we have today, are very corrupt, and that's a huge problem. But I don't think that Bitcoin is solving that problem at all. It's not even addressing the problem. So I still think that if we want to have a better future, we should really just go into the streets and do stuff that people used to do before us. Like, people used to go to the streets, people used to disrupt, and like obviously non-violently, and do it all peacefully and kumbaya, whatever. But like if we just think that Bitcoin will come and these developers that we don't even know who they are just going to solve our problems, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that if we just let Bitcoin take its course, and we let Bitcoin itself to overtake the economy, to overtake the currency, then we're going to lose a lot of our influence, a lot of our rights, and we're going to surrender that to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, it is a pretty large community, and it's not like the shitty developer in the shitty apartment in California can just arbitrarily make a change that individual sees. I mean, there is consensus that transpires within the community between developers and users and software writers. But that's I think also too where you get a lot of like forks, right? And all why there are so many different types of currencies that exist today that serve so many different purposes. I think that the solution isn't just one answer. I think Bitcoin just happens to be the 3,000 pound gorilla because it's the first and it's the top market cap coin. But I think that the solution lies within what people are working on somewhere, somehow. It's like there's constant improvements that are being made. There's new layer solutions that are being created to directly try to mitigate a lot of those concerns. And again, I'm not saying that Bitcoin is the way, it's the answer, it's the one that's going to last forever, that layer 2 is going to solve all these problems. Definitely no, but I feel like that it's at least there's a modicum of hope through all of these projects that have survived through all of the regulation and the challenge of global adoption for an open source project in itself, right? Like, it's just amazes me that it has come this far. When I say this far, I don't necessarily mean just with the price. I mean just with the adoption, with the infrastructure, all of the projects that have been created, everything that runs on top of it, decentralized solutions for exchange of value, like podcasting 2.0, where I have my Lightning node directly tied into my podcast, and people can donate sats to me directly through that. Like, regardless of the token itself, just that ability, the technology stack that exists to make that happen and be highly efficient and accurate and fast is awesome. Like, that is really, really cool. And I just don't think that it's like scrap it and try to create something new is necessarily gonna be, and maybe that is, but I just don't see in like, well, what is it? Like, it has to be defined with rules. It has to be defined with validation and censorship resistance, to centralized authorities. And so I feel like it's the best we've got so far, but yet is also an easy target because it does have flaws, with a lot of the points that you bring up. But I kind of still remain pretty positive on, because the more people that get involved, I think, then the better chance it has to be successful, both from a user base and a development standpoint. And it's just like anything else. You have to hit a critical mass for something. And anytime it does, there's always going to be, I won't call it opposition, but there's going to be opposing forces. Because somebody else thinks that their idea is better and that theirs is going to win, and whether it's Ripple, I joke about Ripple, but like Ethereum or Cardano or any of these other, maybe it's Doge, I don't know, but it's like everyone wants a piece because people are greedy, and greed will usually overtake the good in people when they allow it to consume them. And so that's, I think, where a lot of people who are fairly new in the last few years are just looking at I can make money at this, not like, wow, this actually provides financial sovereignty to people who live in less, fortunate countries that are being oppressed by their government, and through austerity or taxation or the devaluation of their currency. So this is at least, another way. They're not looking at it like that. They're looking at it like, well, if I just, can buy and flip some Doge, it goes up 2 cents and I buy 100,000, I can make, yeah, you're right. It's been kind of, I won't say corrupted, but kind of bastardized in that way. It's like, it's not really what it was intent was. But, again, this is inspiring me to do a lot more in-depth, research too, so that I can be better prepared for making an argument against it, other than just like, well, I really think it's a cool shiny toy and I hope that it does better. Because I think,
Yeah.
it's
I could have been wrong about Lightning. I thought I remembered the argument, but I don't, and I could have mistaken that argument for something else.
right.
But the censorship of the blockchain itself, the layer one, is true. It is
Yes.
possible to actually censor.
Yeah,
and you don't even have to have like a majority of hash rate. Yeah.
Correct. And that argument is a very valid argument. And it's an argument that privacy focused coins like Monero and Zcash will often use. And it's kind of true. And we could get to that point. I mean, it's already happening with exchanges. There's already cases of, several exchanges not allowing a conversion to fiat from certain UTXOs because they have been tagged or associated with like some sort of criminal activity, criminal use. So yes, that is true. That is very true. Where my knowledge starts to dip is, well, what happens when those UTXOs are actually used in Lightning, and it's too late by the time it gets written to the chain, to the blockchain, and it could take a while. It could take a while for that to happen. Depending upon how long it takes to write all those transactions within that Lightning node to the blockchain. But that's again where kind of like I need to do some more deep dive in that. But I do know that, using Lightning Network on a regular basis, running a node, having channels open, which you will be happy because I do have a Lightning channel open with OnlyFans just for you.
Ooh.
Yeah. But yeah, it's kind of like, hey, money comes in and the money goes out, and then it's like, there's nothing stopping it, at the Lightning channel level, at the Lightning node level, that I'm aware of. Now, again, I need to do more research though, and I like to use things before I fully understand them, like to that level. It's kind of like, I don't exactly know how a Tor relay node works on a technical aspect, but I run one, to try to contribute, to the network. But anyways, yeah, I think that's kind of like, we could put a pin in there and continue that, and it would probably also behoove us to, maybe get another personality that's really well versed on the inner workings and the vulnerabilities that exist, and how that consensus is decided to make decisions, how those decisions are made, and how they're applied to the source code. Because someone gets to,
It would be
someone's determining when the code is checked in, or when it's released, when it's rolled out.
Yeah. It'd be awesome to get someone, but we need to be careful about this because there would be some people, I guess, that would be super excited to come on, and they would be just shilling for their company or product or whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
So, yeah, we need to make sure that this is not for them to have a marketing
their
grandstanding or whatever.
Their Bitcoin wallet or their exchange.
Yeah. Yeah,
fair.
like no, we actually should get someone that and explain that we are going to be asking the hard questions. This is not for them to just shill to the audience.
It's not a softball interview. I mean, it's like, these are real questions, and I think that there's probably listeners that maybe understand it to that level, that could reach out, that understand the gaps we're trying to fill, and other audience would probably love to listen to it and be more informed.
It's possible that a lot of our audience is going to hate me, and now you're going to be flooded with Satoshi donations.
I don't think so. I think that there's a lot of unanswered questions, and I think that there's a lot of skepticism. We both believe that there is, that it exists, and there's also a lot of hype, but there's also a lot of excitement. And so I think that to try to be fair, to really get to the full picture, I think the challenge too is trying to explain it in a way that people who are not technical can really understand. I mean, even myself included, because I'm not a I'm not a developer on that level, right? My backgrounds are more in Unix systems and application management and stuff like that. These are very specialized. Blockchain developers is a very specialized skill set, and so it's not something and it's only really been around for a half a decade to a decade, as far as job roles and things like that. So there's a lot of cutting edge stuff that's definitely outside my wheelhouse here, for where my expertise stop. So I would love to learn and be a part of that, and continue to build upon my knowledge base.
Yeah, but we need to actually acknowledge a point here, that this is not just about coding or programming. This is also about economics, finances.
Absolutely.
Yeah, tax law, or law in general, policy making. So this is nobody can be an expert on this, even if they have like decades of coding or whatever. This is such a multidisciplinary complex system that requires we would have to have 10 different people from 10 different disciplines, and that wouldn't be enough, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, because if you have someone who's an expert on fintech law and stuff like that, and they're not going to be an expert in how it's being developed, and developers are not going to probably have all the expertise with 100%. I mean, there's a lot of facets to this topic, and I think that it definitely deserves as many different perspectives that we can get to, without compromising uh, the integrity of the topic by having someone shill something. So
Yeah, but you did achieve something today with me, so I'm not a total waste of your time because you might have proven me wrong.
I don't know. I mean, but there's a lot. That's how these things progress, is by having dialogue, having conversation. That's why I really like doing these. I learn a lot. It sends me back. I do research. I'm going back and watching some of your other content. I'm like, oh yeah. It's refreshing and enlightening, and it's far from a waste of time. If it's the opposite, I enjoy the conversation, number one, and number two, it's like if you're not really challenging what you believe in or what you think, then you're not growing or you're not progressing. And maybe you find that you truly do feel that way for whatever reasons, but it's like that's how we move forward with anything, especially something like as vast as cryptocurrency and blockchain. It's pretty vast. So I'm all in for hitching a ride for being a hitchhiker essentially and taking a ride to see where this goes, because I like to learn. I wish I had just infinite amount of time to just do nothing but learn and research and test and deploy servers and try things out and all that. But there's only so many hours in the day, and so I kind of really try to for the podcast, I try to focus on the things that like the end user can kind of understand and apply pretty quickly without some of those real deep dives. But I know that's where you like to go, and that's what interests me so much. Is figuring out where the end of the road is for me at the current moment.
Yeah, deep dive is really like it's one of my most favorite activities. Like I really do enjoy like going deep into these topics and just turning every stone and trying to find every piece of information, trying to find whatever that can be found, and it's amazing. It's I'm never gonna stop unless I'm stopped.
Yeah,
But I'm glad that we're doing this together. And every episode that we do is longer. This one is almost half an hour longer than
yeah,
our
I noticed
first
that
episode.
too. Which means we'll probably have to push the other topics to another conversation, which is totally fine. And I think they're topics worth discussing for sure. And I'd like to learn more about some of them. And for those that are listening that hung in this long, those topics are like VPNs and privacy, social media tracking, location tracking, that kind of stuff. So I'm always down for that. The more I learn, better equipped I am.
Yeah, I'm very happy with this episode. I mean, I'm pretty subjective, but I think we did well. And I'm looking forward to more listener questions. Definitely, the more the community engages, I think the better this podcast gets.
Absolutely.
So,
and
that's awesome.
I fully expect a swarm of comments around this, and oh, you guys, you know what we're talking about, or this, and it's like awesome because I want to learn as much as I can, and I'm looking forward to reading a lot of that feedback on your subreddit and the comments and stuff, and anyone that reaches out to me, definitely welcome it. As ugly as it might possibly be.
Yeah. That voice message, that was actually pretty cool. I like that.
Yeah, I actually I kind of forgot about that feature. So I use this guy's service called Podpage to host the podcast website. And I'm working on building out a totally different website and everything, but it has been pretty cool. And it's got some of those features in there, and I kind of forgot about them, to be honest. And that was the first voice message I've received through that. So if you go to Closed Network, closedntwrk.com, you can actually just click the microphone and record a message, and it just goes right into this listener tools inbox where I can listen to it and I can play it on the podcast. So if anyone feels compelled to try that out again, that was really, really cool feature.
Yeah, I like answering user questions or listener questions. So we'll do that again. Yeah, I think we are both pretty pretty satisfied with this episode. I think we can wrap it up, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think anyone listening who
Yeah.
made it this far is probably ready.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm sure that a lot of people are actually listening to the end. Like why not? Like if you start while listening and you're halfway in, like why not finish it?
Sure. Absolutely. Especially if this topics interest you to this level that it does for us. I like listening to other people talk about, especially cryptocurrency, but anything privacy related. But cryptocurrency is always like makes my ears raise up a little bit. Like, oh, what's going on? Let me check. Yeah, if I see the description or whatever, it's definitely a point of interest. So
I think we are a pretty unique podcast. I'm not sure if there is a podcast that does like 3 hour episodes on these topics.
there's like a couple, maybe not quite this long. Like I know Citadel Dispatch, which is Matt Odell's Bitcoin podcast. He might be a great person, or at least doing some research and listening to some of his episodes. And Marty Bent from Tales from the Crypt can go pretty long sometimes. Most of his podcasts are not necessarily like on this subject matter necessarily. A lot of his stuff does carry, they kind of cover philosophical, aspects of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, but also economics and things like they span just beyond even Bitcoin. But there's not very many. They're really not that I've come across. If maybe I just need to discover more, but yeah, there are very few. I'm sure.
No, it's just us. There is no other podcast.
There's no other
like
one. We're
us.
the best. We're the only ones.
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere else. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Well, thank you for this one. It was awesome. So
Likewise.
I guess. Yeah. I guess that's it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Later.